Hello, romance lovers. Today's story is called Reset Lady. The story of the main character begins from the moment when she slowly woke up from sleep and saw in front of her a certain woman with a long braid and dark hair who called her Miss Karen and asked her to wake up. The protagonist herself was lying in a bright room on a soft bed, next to which was a servant who was still telling the mistress to get up because she needed to get ready for something, while Karen was rubbing her eyes from sleep. The girl with dark hair smiled at the main character and came closer to the curtains, intending to open them, also telling the lady that today is her birthday, and then she needs to get up early to be ready for anything. But when the girl opened her purple eyes, looking at the ceiling with an empty gaze, she thought that this was far from her real birthday, which she was 100% sure of, because she was reincarnated in this world. The thing is that the girl found herself a long time ago in a novel that she had read once, and which looks like a red book with gold ornaments, which is quite thick and beautiful, which can be said about the story itself. And now she seems to be lying not on the bed, being in her room, but to be on one of the pages of an open red curtain, where she is with the servants. But she feels that everything around her is as if lifeless, but created thanks to the novel. In this story, Karen is already 117 years old, when she came into this world as a very little girl with red hair and in a cute suit, remembering that the novel itself tells a love story, incredibly banal and boring. And according to the story, Karen, who dreams of real feelings and true love, does not accept the love of her fiancé, which is why he remains in the background when the red-haired lady herself is looking for her one and only chosen one for life. But her life was not the sweetest, because soon, according to the plot, she ends up with the evil and arrogant daughter of an aristocrat, who has not only blonde hair, but also scary eyes with which she looks down on everyone. Then Karen with red hair suffers humiliation from such a lady for a very long time, when she herself puts on a maid's uniform in order to sell to serve her clearly not of her own free will, with suffering and torment. But everything turns out not to be so bad, because in the novel she meets her only fiancé with blonde hair and incredibly handsome appearance, with whom she dates and, looking into his eyes, realizes that she feels sympathy for him. And after that, as in the most magical fairy tales with a happy ending, they sweetly dance a waltz, just the two of them, intending to live their whole lives together happily as husband and wife, because Karen is already dressed in a magnificent snow-white dress. However, failures and grief still overtake the happy Karen in the novel, because the last page of the book describes how she, having drunk a glass of red wine, dies, falling to the floor in blood, spilling the drink on the white floor. And when the girl drinks the poisoned wine, she realizes with horror that the nightmare is starting all over again, because a year ago the heroine woke up under a tree when it was raining heavily, and she, with horror on her face, touches her neck, because there was a noose on it. At that moment, she again overcame her fears to reunite with her fair-haired fiancé, which is why she hugged him tightly. But she did not suspect that the mosquito would not end, but would continue and continue. The lady with red hair and a sad face, realizing that the same end awaited her in all her lives, realized that no matter what she chose, the end would still be terrible, where she would die a terrible death. She remembers falling from the window, which caused all the maids in the castle to look at her with horror and stretch out their hands to her, intending to save her. But this will no longer help the protagonist, because her fate is to die in a terrible way after all this. She also remembers how one of her lives ended not as an accident, but because of an unknown person who showed her the bloody blade of his dagger when she herself looked at it with empty eyes, already in a bloody dress. And she, touching her bloody white dress, felt with horror the incredible pain and horror that was written on her face when she realized that her unhappy life would end again and she would wake up again under a tree in heavy rain. She even tried to drown herself in a deep lake, which she did once, diving to the bottom. But this did not help her get rid of her fate, because she was reborn again and again in the world of the novel. And the girl used fire to finally end everything, because one day she was surrounded by huge clots of flame that were getting closer and closer to her, which forced the lady to hide in a corner. But there was also another peculiarity that appeared every time she woke up in the garden under a tree, because there was always a gold coin in her mouth, which even now, being in bed, she examines, realizing that it is already the 100th, because the lady managed to accumulate a huge sum thanks to her reincarnations. The strange object in the mistress's hands was also noticed by the servants, who looked suspiciously at the coin in the lady's hands and asked what it was, holding something of her own in her hands. Having told the hotel worker that it was just a good luck charm in the form of a coin, she fell silent while the servant was near her and doing her own thing, telling her that she just loved to tell fortunes with a coin and even offered to do so to her. After telling the lady that if the coin landed on heads, she would have a happy life. And if not, not so much, the servant told Karen to toss a coin, and the heroine did so, causing the gold object to spin in the air. The coin fell into the red-haired girl's palm, causing both of them to stare at the coin to see which side it landed on and what it would reveal about the protagonist's fate. As it turned out, she did not get heads, which meant that this time the girl would suffer all her life. But when the servant told her that everything was completely wrong, she was already looking at her reflection in the water when she held a wash saucer in front of her. And the next moment, the lady was sitting quietly on a chair while the maid was combing her hair. She was listening to her story about how she would soon be engaged to Dulan, whom she had known since childhood, so he should understand her better than anyone else. But suddenly, the red-haired lady turned to the servant and addressed her, calling her Nancy and asking her if she wanted to exchange partners, since she did not want to marry Dulan, and she thought her husband was handsome. And when Nancy laughed, and the heroine said that she was just joking, she imagined Nancy with a rope in her hands and a manic look, realizing that in fact she was ready to do anything for her man, even agree to murder. Once again, the heroine puts on a pink corset, which incredibly suffocates her and which Nancy pulls on her, asking the girl if she has someone else besides Dulan, because she needs to dress so beautifully for a handsome groom. Then the girl did not answer Nancy in any way, and therefore after some time she was already at the celebration, where she was incredibly beautiful and memorable. But her face depicted only calmness, because she was going to this celebration not for the 1st or 10th time. And while all the aristocrats were looking at her with admiration, gossiping about her, behind them the heroine already saw that very groom named Dulan, who was holding a bakaz in his hand and was waiting for her at that time. Approaching a not very pleasant-looking man, the lady asked Dulan if he had been caught in the rain on his way here, because his appearance, to put it mildly, was very strange. And when the kelpie dripped from him, he would just sigh tiredly and tell the lady that if she were to be his wife, she should already be submissive and not tell him anything that might upset him. But that didn't stop Karen. Noticing that she was again in a familiar place, hearing the same melodies, seeing the same people for the 100th time, the heroine devastatedly raised her head up and said that she felt like she was in hell from which she could not escape. And when Dulan said, like, "Passerby, this is their destiny," the girl looked at him with her empty eyes and asked what he just said, but the guy meant that they were destined to be together, no matter what. He hurried to take her hand in his, which was not only very pale, but also had numerous scars on it. And at that moment, he told the girl that even if she didn't like something, there was no choice, and they should become a couple. Karen looked at her chosen one in silence, as did Dulan, realizing that this was her 69th dance with the groom, from whom she could not escape. Because every time she died, everything began again. Behind her, the girl heard the suitor apologizing to his lady for stepping on her foot. But Karen was not surprised by this, because she had already seen this 45 times, having managed to be reborn more than 100 times. And behind Dulan's back, the girl saw a waiter who clumsily dropped a tray with glasses, which she had seen for the 78th time already, and none of it surprised her anymore. Because of this, she looked as if she were not alive. And when they began to dance slowly, making circles around the surprised aristocrats, all the ladies and guys around them began to whisper that Dulan looked very pathetic, and they even pointed at him, which she felt was right. But suddenly, when the main character got tired of being pitied for the 100th time and Dulan being humiliated, she decided to change everything, because she grabbed the guy by the collar and was already going to drag him somewhere, when she realized that he too felt the humiliation of society. She told him to just follow her, but the surprised guy asked the lady where exactly she was taking him, to which the protagonist did not answer and remained silent, dragging him through the crowd of aristocrats to the exit of the celebration hall. With the thought that she had something she had never tried, the girl continued to drag Dulan along with her through the dark corridors with high windows, but he could not resist her, so he followed her in a hurry, asking what she was doing. The lady understood that only she remembered what was happening in the world, and therefore she did not need to worry about others. And it was with these thoughts that she led Dulan to a dark room with the doors slightly open, telling the guy that if they were engaged, she could do whatever she wanted with him. Having laid Dulan on the bed, which was in the mysterious room, the girl already wanted to try with him something she had never done before. But at that time, the brunette was leaving, who looked at the girl in amazement and asked her what she wanted. The mad lady looked at Dulan with both joy and madness, saying that she just wanted to try something new for herself, and then she ordered him to take off his clothes. And sometime after the protagonist achieved what she wanted, the girl, in complete silence, was tidying herself up because Dulan was adjusting his black clothes, and the heroine was looking at herself in the mirror and adjusting her hair. He turned to her shyly and with a bit of disdain and said that it was all just her desire and initiative, so he didn't want to have a lot of problems later. But this didn't surprise Karen either. Karen only hurried to take his arm and ordered him to lead her into the hall, because they still had 3 dances to dance, and Dulan in response only sighed with fatigue, realizing that not everything was over yet. And as soon as they were back in the center of the hall, they both again heard gossip from the ladies and aristocrats around them, who were whispering that if it weren't for Dulan's inheritance, Karen wouldn't have had to marry him. But the lady was surprised that this time Dulan behaved quite calmly and balanced, although this is very unlike him, because thanks to hundreds of lives, she knows that Dulan is a very vulnerable and touchy person who does not tolerate insults and gossip. Even when they both began to dance slowly, the rumors and whispers did not stop, because other guests of the celebration were watching them, laughing more at Dulan, asking each other what he had been taught all this time. And it was clear from Dulan's face that he was not happy to hear bad words about himself and listen to open humiliation, which surprised her, not understanding whether he was going to continue to endure all this. But no one expected at all that when Dulan wanted to take a step back, he collided with one waiter who was just holding a tray with another glass in his hands, but dropped it in front of everyone. And Dulan himself fell to the floor, while behind him the waiter hurriedly stepped aside, but still did not look at the glass of red wine on the tray, which is why it fell. But at this time, the brunette himself was making painful cries. But the protagonist herself looked at everything so indifferently, as if she knew that all this would happen, because she thought about it. Like she knew that something would happen that would interrupt her peaceful pastime with Dulan. So she decided to just give the guy a helping hand so that he would get up quickly, remembering that she had seen this 100 times already. And nothing she saw or heard around her surprised her anymore. And he looked at her as if he was not ready for the girl to extend a helping hand to him, and so he raised his black eyes to her and looked at Karen with displeasure, as if he was already tired of everything, his failures, falls, and ridicule. But the main character herself did not show him her true emotions because she did not want to laugh at him, like all the people around her. But on the contrary, she looked at him with understanding and calmness, waiting for the moment when he would accept her help. Absolutely all the guests of the party looked at them and laughed at them, but this did not stop the main character, who still intended to help her fiancé, extending her hand to him, when all the aristocrats laughed just because of this. In her head, the lady was already imagining how, after some time, Dulan would pour wine on the head of the very servant who had caused him to fall, which, according to the story, the heroine would be very surprised by, but she would still not refuse him. Without using the girl's hand to get up, Dulan hurried to his feet himself, looked menacingly at the waiter, who turned out to be the culprit, and ordered him to get lost, to which the waiter responded with fear, saying that he would immediately carry out his order. And to the surprise of the main character herself, who looked at all the events with amazement, Dulan did not yell at the waiter, much less pour wine on him, but simply stood in front of her and took her hand, offering to continue dancing. This surprised the protagonist so much that she looked at him with genuine shock, because for the first time, the protagonist did not act as it was written in the novel, but restrained himself, preferring to continue the dance and not waste time and energy on anger. The thought that everything could change for the first time, if Dulan had not acted as it was written in the book for the first time, made the lady remember herself, or rather her long red hair and violet eyes, because she is Karen in the novel. And now, when the main character was back in her room, sitting at the table and looking at the coin in her hands, she thought that after spending so much time in Karen's body, she had discovered a couple of patterns. The first and most important thing she understood was that all her lives begin in a garden where there is a heavy rain, and she herself ends up under a tree in a snow-white dress and with a rope around her neck, as well as with a coin in her mouth. She also noticed that she was unable to live in the world of the novel for at least 1 year because she died, finding herself in a grove with white flowers, after which everything returned to the beginning, and she again found herself under a tree with a coin loop. Holding in her hands the gold coin that she was examining, she realized that each time it was not just a shiny thing, because the coin had an individual, never-repeating number. The lady with red hair tossed a coin up with an indifferent face and asked herself in front of the mirror if she would ever be able to break the system and stop everything, or if she was doomed to live like this, dying painfully and finding herself under a tree again. She remembers how in one of her lives she tried to eat so often and so well that when there were many dishes on the table in front of her, Karen still ate them all in order to change her life. But this did not affect anything. Also, the girl in one of her lives was involved in charity work, having run away from home with the intention of never having any contact with those she had been surrounded by in the past. But this did not help her because simply handing out bread to children and teenagers had no effect. She even tried to poke herself, which led her to imagine how she once attempted to fall down the stairs and break as many bones as possible, which she succeeded in doing. But she kept waking up in the body of the novel's heroine, Karen. Karen remembers how maids often came to her after she fell down the stairs, but did not die, but became paralyzed, because of which others had to look after her. And the girls came to her to wash her with a basin of water, and she cried, because she couldn't move a single part of her body, which is why she had to just lie there and wait for the moment when she would die again, cursing those who left her to rot in bed without the right to die. But now, when she was again twirling the coin in her hands, she noticed that the thing itself bounced off the table and fell to the floor, which is why the curious Karen looked at it, as if to find out what the gold object would show her this time. Heads or tails. She looked at the coin and indifferently realized that even if she wanted to take revenge on all the people who hurt her in past lives, it would be pointless, because only she had the ability to be reborn. And all the others did not remember anything that she had in her memory. Remembering the pages of the novel on which she wrote the lives of all the characters, the lady realized that even if she did not take revenge, but wanted to ask people for help, nothing good would come of it. And she thought so because of her past. She remembers how in her 48th life she was covered in blood and begged Dulan to help her. He turned away from her and replied that he would not bandage her, even if she was covered in blood. Before that, he had talked to her about the engagement and refused to treat her. After that, she spent a whole year in bed when a certain blonde man came to her and somehow took care of her, wiping her face from sweat with a rag, because Karen was very ill and wanted only to die. And in her 58th life, she met a blonde of noble birth named Isila, who was her rival, who shouted at her and asked how she could take away a man named Raymond from her. Then she was in the role of a maid, bowing to her mistress. But when other maids lifted her up, she screamed desperately and stayed to prove that everything was wrong. But at that moment, Isila had already ordered others to kill her, because she died from burns when the blonde ordered the servants to pour boiling water on the heroine. And her 18th life out of more than 100 ended because of Isila's father, who one day picked up an axe and was already walking towards the protagonist with a very scary look, when he himself is supposedly a nightmare for everyone, a destroyer of happiness. And he decided to swing an axe at her head, saying that she had stolen his daughter's happiness, implying that in this same life she had married a blonde man named Raymond, with whom Isila was also in love. Remembering that very red book in which the whole plot was written, the girl began to wonder more and more how long all this would continue, and when it would end. If even in her 100th life she could not find a way out of it. Imagining dark shadows with scary eyes that seemed to follow her everywhere, she realized that everyone in the novel wanted her dead and was doing everything to achieve this, which each time seemed true to the protagonist. And she herself found herself alone in this dark world, where there is only her and no one will help her, because of which she now does not know how to act correctly and what to achieve, if each of her lives lasts only a year and ends differently, but terribly. That's why this time she decided to toss her gold coin, which caused it to spin quickly in the air, while the main character hoped for the best, although she did not believe that something better was in store for her than another painful death. But what happened next surprised her very much, which is why she even hurried to bend down to the coin that fell on the floor to take a better look at it with unusual emotions. Imagining all those people who killed her painfully and cruelly, she realized that although they did not remember what they did to her in her past life, she understood perfectly well that she was very angry with them, and therefore even wanted revenge, although she knew that it was useless. And when she realized that even though she would have to take revenge on an unusually large number of people, she knew that she had an endless amount of time to do it. She noticed that the coin did not fall on one side, but stood on its edge. She looked at this miracle curiously and quite calmly asking herself in her head why she had not thought about revenge before, because this could be at least the only purpose of her existence if she had fallen into an endless loop of lives. Picking up the coin in her hands and continuing to examine it, the girl with bright red hair and purple eyes realized that she had just wanted to do something bad in one of her lives, and revenge was perfect for that. And remember that she always remembered herself next to Raymond, being happy. In a wedding dress and with a smile on her face, when they danced together, she realized that all this time she had hoped for love, which was supposed to change the world. But now she was disappointed. Now, when she decided to squeeze the red rosebud with all her might, as if it were she, mutilated by everyone, but still beautiful, she realized for herself that it is not love that changes people, but death, and all the most terrible things. And so, smiling slyly to herself, the red-haired lady realized that now she would not be a naive lady who would seek peace and goodness with love, but would be a real killer who would take revenge on everyone. And while the girl was already preparing to become better, strange events were happening on the border of the heir estates, which are her estates, because several people were looking at the fallen horse, which broke its knee, and understood that it would not get up again and would not be able to do the work. And the blonde's father, Verdick, looked at the injured horse and was not happy about the problem, calling the animal a real nasty thing, wondering what to do if there were problems with transport. Knocking on the window of the Crete, he ordered his daughter to get out of the carriages, which after a while caused a curious blonde with blue eyes named Isila to look at him, asking the couple what had happened. And when her father held her hand so that his daughter could safely descend from the carriage to the ground, he told her that from this place she would have to go on foot, which surprised and indignantly surprised the blonde, asking if this was true. After a while, the father and daughter were already walking along a forest path when the man held his child by the arm and told them that the soil here was very fertile. But Isila didn't like this either. She could barely walk and said that she wouldn't come here again because her heels made it difficult for her to walk on the soft ground. But when the couple saw houses surrounded by trees in the distance, Isila's father told his daughter that since the land here was excellent, they could harvest a great crop and make money from it. And there were few people here, and the costs for improvement were low. Holding his daughter's hand, the blonde man told the lady that if he got these lands, he would let her manage them, which would be a good lesson for her before the wedding and a good experience. He said this with a kind smile and the hope that his daughter would become as successful as he was in the family business. But when the blonde realized that if she became a good manager, that perhaps Raymond would notice her and become interested in her, she looked at her dad with a smile and promised that she would be an exemplary manager and would develop her dad's business. After some time, the father and daughter decided to go to a modest church with a light exterior and several windows, which was located in a small settlement to meet the locals. Already in the church, Verdick was talking with other artists when we find his daughter herself next to him, listening to the fact that her father's negotiations with the employees of his business are completed, so now they can rest. The guy, wearing a monocle and smiling modestly at Verdick, said that they would see each other again in 6 months, after which he wished the father and daughter all the best as they parted. But his smile was too forced. In response, Isila's father looked at his interlocutor with a smile and, laughing, said that for such a long time they would even have to pay him dearly if they wanted to do business with him. And while everyone laughed, hoping that Verdick was joking, the blonde Isila behind him smiled, realizing that her dad was joking again. But when the lady was thinking what would change when her daddy got these lands, she noticed that some gossips were talking about a girl who had incredible beauty. She also noticed that the two girls walked towards the hall in the church, which made the blonde even more curious about who they were talking about. She decided to follow them, looking at each of them and thinking that since the church was quite ordinary, she didn't think that there could be something amazing and incredible here. And she was still unable to see what the large crowd of believers were looking at, which is why she tried to squeeze through them and see at least something. However, when she finally managed to rise up on her toes and see something in the distance, she noticed that absolutely everyone was looking at the red-haired lady of incredible beauty who was sitting in the empty church. Surprising everyone with this, she listened to the priest's sermon with her eyes closed, while her hair literally shone in the sun and turned into a precious red stone, which amazed and delighted all the ministers in the church. And only when others called her, she turned her head towards Isila, which amazed everyone around her even more, and everyone affectionately called her a lady, while the blonde understood that she was like an angel who had descended from heaven. The sweet lady with red hair looked at her friend, who smiled at her and told her something exciting, while the blonde remembered that the lady with the purple gali herself was the daughter of Lord Hare, and she had heard about her before. Taking a closer look at her clothes, Isila suddenly realized that she was not eager to wear expensive outfits and dresses, because the heroine had ordinary, even worn-out clothes, as if she was from a village. Also noticing that Karen's main adornment is her wonderful, sincere smile, and not the countless amount of jewelry on her neck and wrists. And because of this, Isila begins to sincerely hate her. That is why she began to look at her with disdain and hostility, and even felt envy towards her because she, having a lot of jewelry and an expensive dress, does not receive attention, while the red-haired lady enjoys it to the fullest. When everything around her seemed to darken from her incredible anger, the blonde realized that it was Karen who would become her main enemy, whom she would try to destroy, just so she would no longer see how people were interested in her and admired her, like a beauty queen. At that very moment, the priest told all the believers in time that they should be pure, like white doves that fly peacefully in the sky and do not harm anyone. But Isila already had her own plans for Karen. He continued to say that all sinners would definitely go to hell, and this awaited absolutely everyone who had committed bad deeds in one way or another. And the red-haired woman at home listened to the priest's words in silence with her eyes closed. After some time, he announced to everyone that the service was over and everyone could go free, which is why all the believers present began to gather their things and leave the hall, but not Karen, who was still sitting in place. She smiled unnoticed by anyone, whispering that God had not heard her prayer, even though she prayed to him every night and day, intending to free herself from endless suffering, and that was why she was disappointed in him. But as soon as she said this, Dulan suddenly appeared in front of her, grabbed her by the shoulder, and whispered to her angrily that she should not desecrate the sacrament of the prayer service, which she was currently attending, with her heresy. However, she merely waved her hand in front of Dulan's face, causing him to step aside and remembering that the fact that he himself stood at the pulpit of this church was already sufficient desecration. Suddenly, she noticed a blonde named Isila in front of her, who smiled at Karen and said that she hoped that they would get along, because she lived here and she was going to build a business on these same lands. Dulan was not happy about the appearance of a certain lady, and therefore began to ask Karen who it was. And the red-haired lady calmly answered Isila that it was her fiancé, and also pointed at the black-haired church minister with her hand. In response, the blonde with the luxurious dress and jewelry on her neck smiled, putting her hand to her cheek, and told Karen that she heard that she was getting married, but she didn't think that she would choose Dulan as her groom. And in her words, there was actually a dark odest, because people looked at Karen with a smile and pretended to communicate with her. In fact, they thought that she was a real pathetic creature if she chose such a poor man as a groom to live here. She even told Karen that they were right for each other, and if not, she was sure that they would still be happy, which surprised Dulan even more, looking at the blonde with stunned eyes, when the protagonist herself calmly responded to Isila with gratitude. Noticing the shiny white dress that Isila wore to the simple church, Karen began to smile and think that this was the 100th time she had met her, and each time the fashionista chose only the most lush and elaborate outfits. At this moment, the lady came to life, looked at her interlocutor in surprise, and asked her why she suddenly said that she seemed to like one of her decorations on her neck, if she was looking at it like that. At that moment, a bell seemed to ring around her with new ideas regarding revenge, which made her look at the train of her rival's dress with an even bigger grin, realizing that she had not changed a bit, but remained the same as in her past lives. But the blonde noticed that the red-haired lady could not take her eyes off her dress and especially the necklace on her neck. She laughed, telling that such a precious thing was given to her by her own fiancé, as if mocking her and Dulan. In response, the heroine only grabbed Dulan by the arms and smiled at her rival, saying that it was very sweet, while Dulan was even more indignant about what had happened, telling his bride that these were all worldly goods and there was no need to envy them, but Karen had no plans to do that. And all because the protagonist already had a great desire to hang Isila on her own beautiful necklace, thereby depriving her of life with the help of her own things, which she so arrogantly tries to brag about in front of her. That is why she smiled terribly and ominously, looking at Isila's necklace with a thirst to quickly fulfill all her terrible desires and take her first revenge, which Isila does not even suspect, thinking that Karen is simply jealous of her. She imagined herself looking at the dead Isila and talking to her with a smile, but it was all her necklace's fault, with which she tried to elevate herself among others, and that's why the lady with purple eyes was laughing at her now. Isila squeezed her palms so hard in her imagination that the blue fabric with which she strangled Isila became more and more taut, depriving the blonde of life while Karen talked, who was only enjoying her revenge. And also, so that the girl would not be upset because her beloved could disappear, Karen provided how she put her necklace in her palm, laughingly telling the deceased lady that now he would never part with it. Sometime after the girl had been to church and was already heading home, when the golden sunset fell on the large and tall building in which she lived, all the servants noticed something strange. The thing is that Karen walked so cheerfully that literally everyone turned around to look at her and understand what Madame was so happy about. But they also had no idea that Lendi was happy only because of the thought of revenge. Appearing in front of her palace, the previously crazy and unhappy Karen, who knew no end to her grief, suddenly began to simply stand among the bushes with flowers and laugh as if she was truly happy. Just remembering in her head what she could do to Isila, namely, hang her and put the necklace in her bloody hand, Karen realized that now only thoughts of killing all the enemies in the world filled her mind. And so she laughed out loud as if there was no one around, because now Karen does not intend to tolerate bullying and will do everything to take revenge and feel the sweet taste of revenge. The next day, blonde Isila still couldn't find her favorite necklace in the Hare family palace, which is why she opened all the drawers and looked at all the furniture, frantically trying to find it because it is her favorite thing, which she is ready to boast about for the rest of her life. Even in her nightgown, the blonde had already begun to look for it all over the room and was getting even more angry, realizing that she had put it on yesterday in church, and now she couldn't find it, even after searching all the cracks and dressers in the bedroom. At that moment, the servant Nancy decided to enter her room, holding a glass container with clean water for her morning wash. But when she politely greeted her mistress, she had no idea what a bad mood she had been in since the morning. Standing next to the large bed in which the girl slept, the blonde fell silent, and the first thing she did after a while was ask the servant how exactly she got here yesterday, because Isila herself did not remember anything. But the brunette with blue eyes did not answer this question directly, but only looked at the lady doubtfully and answered that she herself fell asleep during the prayer service in the church, so she does not know what happened to her. This angered Isila so much that she suddenly approached Nancy and started yelling at her, asking where her necklace had gone. But the brunette remained calm, asking what she was talking about. The blonde shouted again that it was gone, but Nancy, who had suspicions about Isila, looked at her with distrust and contempt, not understanding what the lady, who had been inadequate since the morning, meant. Realizing that even the servants would not give her a clear answer, the girl with blue eyes hurried to check the closet with her dresses and examine each of them, asking Nancy with fury where her necklace had gone. And while she was doing this, the attendant calmly poured water into a basin especially for Isila to wash herself. But the lady did not even care about washing herself, because she was thinking only about the necklace that she hoped to find in the closet. Isila intended to find her favorite decoration at any cost, but when the brunette said with a sly smile that if it wasn't in the closet, then she couldn't help. But this hurt Isila more. After Isila ordered the servant to turn around and explain her words, Nancy did so, saying that she should now be primping and washing herself, because breakfast was already waiting for her, and not searching for something. Thinking that the servant was being rude to her, the blonde immediately came closer to her in order to hit her on the cheek with all her might, which caused the brunette with the braid to even move away from her a couple of steps. The blow caused the lady to fall to the floor, but Isila did not even plan to help her, but only shouted at her, asking if she had stolen her necklace, since she was behaving in her opinion so impudently and ill-mannered. Her screams seemed to be heard even in the street, because the young girl with golden hair was screaming at the dryad and ordering her to immediately find the necklace that was missing from her, as if it were her personal servant. But in response, Nancy only looked at her with the same smile as if mockingly, not intending to follow her orders but feeling a strong pain in the lip area, because even blood appeared on her face. The blonde was so angry at the servant that she clenched her teeth in front of her and intended to beat her even more when anger filled her whole soul. She could no longer stand Nancy calmly smiling at her in front of her, but she was unable to do something more terrible to the girl, because the main character suddenly entered the room in a beautiful, dark dress, followed by many servants, and who asked Isila what was going on here. However, the blonde's anger and indignation did not subside, so she turned to the protagonist with great rage, shouting to everyone that her necklace was missing, and that was the only reason she was making so much noise. And just like Nancy, the red-haired lady remained calm, looking at Isila with her violet eyes and asking her which necklace exactly she had lost, which looked a little suspicious and feigned. Even clenching her hands into fists in indignation, the blonde began to mutter through her teeth that she couldn't find anywhere that very necklace that she had on her just yesterday and that she carried with her everywhere. Also looking at Nancy, who at that time stood up on her feet and held her wound with her hands, Isila told Karen that the servants were also behaving quite suspiciously, and that was why she no longer trusted them. And Isila was very surprised that Nancy, who had previously been smiling and steadfast with her, became more gentle and affectionate at the sight of the red-haired lady, lowering her eyes into them and telling the protagonist that it was not she who stole the necklace and that she did not even know what it looked like. That's why the blonde hesitated with such shock and astonishment, as if she had previously had no idea that Nancy was not a simple maid, but Karen's personal servant, and now she was speaking to her so respectfully. In response, the red-haired lady only covered her face with her hand, as if from slight shame, ordering the maids behind her to search the rooms for the necklace, and she told Isila that it was time to get ready for breakfast. But this greatly indignantly upset the blonde, who began to look angrily at Karen and tell her that it was not so important, because her necklace was almost the most important thing for her, and the loss of it could greatly upset her. However, she immediately stopped talking because she saw something behind Karen that made her wary, and everything around seemed to turn black and dark, like in a bad dream. The thing is that she saw in the doorway the terrible eyes of the servants, who looked at her and did not look away, because of which in the magical darkness their glowing eyes were even more mysterious. But the girl herself did not understand what was happening, because she just wanted to find her thing. That's why she looked at them with fear and caution, trying to find an answer to the question of why the servants were looking at her so fearfully. But at that moment, Karen already wanted to turn to her. Having said Isila's name, the red-haired lady clearly wanted to ask her something, but the blonde, turning her head towards her with displeasure, only asked what she wanted from her, still not having calmed down from her anger. And at that moment, when the violet-eyed woman looked at Isila with frightening devastation, she put her hand on the shoulder of her servant in the name of Nancy, and said menacingly that she should understand that the brunette was her personal servant. It seemed that the blonde wanted to object to Karen, but did not do so because she blushed with shame, but still began to look at the lady with feigned pride and contempt, as if now she would not trust everyone around her. After some time, the servants at Karen's estate were already looking for that very necklace of Isila's, which is why the maids checked every corner, talking among themselves about how the blonde had arrived to them yesterday and had already caused a stir. Even on the street, the butlers and maids checked every blade of grass to see the lady's necklace, but they found nothing even when the day was approaching sunset, and they still examined every lawn and bush. It was with this problem that the heroine turned to her father. She could not calm down, which is why she rushed around the room and told her dad about the missing necklace, while he himself sat on the sofa and listened to her. He responded to her claims by looking sternly at her and saying that he was not going to worsen relations with the Hare estate just because of some trinket that his daughter had already managed to lose. The blonde, with a very capricious character, just sat down on the sofa in front of her dad and asked him what she should do now, because the necklace was a gift from Raymond himself, whom she considers her main fiancé. The Lord only turned away from her and began to think more diligently, realizing that for everyone around the necklace was of no use to anyone, because it was not even an engagement ring from his daughter's fiancé. But Isila thought only about this decoration, and no one else. At that moment, the heroine's fingers began to shake for some reason, which made the lady wonder why she felt so uncomfortable, as if she felt something terrible approaching, when her fingers were already in the dirt, because she had been digging everywhere with them in order to find the decoration. Remembering just the groom of his daughter, who has a beautiful appearance, proud posture, personal weapon, uniform, and beautiful hair, Lord Verdict began to wonder why he chose his daughter, if he is the hero of the country and could have chosen a wife of more noble origin. This was precisely what was bothering the man with blue eyes, which made him look at the floor and think. It was strange that the hero of the country wanted to deal with his daughter, clearly keeping some kind of plan to himself, if among all the noble ladies of higher status he chose her. Once again recalling Raymond's appearance, his green eyes and blonde hair, Verdict thought that he was the debtor in their family, and therefore he would not be able to escape, also not having the character for it. That's why Dad took his daughter by the hands and looked at her, telling her that he could get her a similar necklace, but the blonde still answered that she didn't need anything else, but wanted the exact necklace that her fiancé had given her. At that moment, Verdict seemed to realize that he had raised her daughter a little differently than he had planned, because Isila did not want to make concessions to him even when he told her about all the difficulties of the situation. Then he decided to calmly get up from the sofa, straightening his collar and telling his daughter that it was her own fault and that she needed to take better care of her things, which made Isila even more indignant, asking her father how he could say that. As a result, Isila had to walk sadly down the hallway and think about how her fiancé, Raymond, would definitely be upset if he found out that she had so irresponsibly lost the necklace he had given her. She was still unhappy with the whole situation and had no intention of leaving everything alone, so she was angry, continuing to walk down the corridor and realizing only that she was very tired of all this, although she only wanted to find what turned out to be lost the next day after use. And she approached a certain mysterious, dark door to open it and enter the room, wearily thinking that she already wanted to return home and never return to such a strange place as this palace with Karen. With her wounded hand, she firmly grabbed the door handle and began to pull it towards herself, hoping to find the necklace at least in this room. But she had no idea what a surprise awaited her in the bedroom. The thing is that the weak light from the corridor first fell on the floor, which turned out to be completely bloody. There were such large pools of blood on it, as if a person had been killed in such a terrible and dark place. And the heroine noticed something in the depths of the room that shocked her, suddenly froze in place, trying to make out in the darkness what in a nightmare she had never dreamed of. Because the blood turned out to be only the beginning of the horror that she was about to see. And all because in the room, which had a neatly made bed, some furniture and thick curtains, not only was there blood visible, which was spreading in large puddles across the floor, but also on the bed was the main decoration of the interior in the form of a human head which was looking straight at the doorway. Right in front of this head, Isila's brows sparkled with various reflections and remained clean and seemingly untouched. But the heroine was no longer so happy with such a find, because the way she found it plunged her into horror and real fear. She decided to walk across the bloody floor and enter the scary, silent room with incredible shock on her face, not taking her eyes off the bed on which she saw a real human head. Because of it, she did not believe her eyes. Noticing not only the outline of the Grolvoa, but also the dark braid, because of which Isila immediately remembered that very servant who was still alive in the morning and smiling at her, she realized that under it lay her precious necklace, which she intended to find at the cost of everything. Out of fear, she moved away from the bed, talking to the head as if it were a living person and trying to find out from it what it was doing here. But out of horror, Isila herself felt how beads of sweat quickly flowed down her face, her legs themselves forcing her to retreat back from the bed, her light, expensive dress more and more covered in blood, while the girl was overcome with real fear and the realization that she was not even in a dream, but in reality, which she regretted to some extent. Slamming the door behind her with all her might, she began to run as fast as she could, holding the train of her dress in her hands and trying to find an answer to the question of when everything took such a turn, also greedily inhaling and exhaling air as she ran. She began to cry from the nightmarish situation and did not understand why everything turned out this way, because earlier she had only given that same servant a light slap in the face, and now her severed head frightened her to the point of horror. And when she was thinking about why her head was lying in her room on the bed, if she had not had time to learn her name during her life, she herself did not notice how she stepped on the fabric of her dress, which caused her to fall to the floor, sliding along it for a couple more meters. However, the lady hastened to rise in spite of everything, leaning on her hands and asking herself what she should do now, what it all meant, and most importantly, who had done this and with what intentions, using such demonstrativeness and her necklace. Isila cried and could not finally get back on her feet, feeling powerless not only in her body, but also inside herself, because she desperately tried to convince herself that it was not her fault, and she did not even wish death on that servant, which meant that she definitely did not die because of her. However, when she heard the voice of another lady shouting her name ahead, Isila suddenly remembered how she had hit the maid on the cheek during the day and realized that no one would see her here alone because then everyone would think that he was the murderer. And in front of her, there was already a woman in simple shoes and a white dress who was looking at Isila so intently that the blonde felt all the most unpleasant sensations on herself, as if she was being drilled with a gaze. And Isila raised her angry and furious eyes to the girl, as if she already knew who was standing in front of her, and became even more furious, trying to understand why all this had happened to her, and how she had deserved such mockery. The thing is, in front of her was an incredibly calm and simply curious protagonist of the story, who looked down at Isila with slight indifference and asked her what was going on here, as if she knew nothing. After that, she smiled so sinisterly and madly that her eyes seemed to light up when she asked Isila what she was doing in the dark corridor at night, when she should already be in her chambers and sleeping. Also holding in her hand a lantern with which Karen illuminated her entire path, she used its light to examine Isila's face and honestly admitted to her that she was pale as a corpse, also as if ridiculing her for this and putting her in an awkward position. Raising her head to Karen, the blonde first laughed to pretend that everything was fine, but then began to stutter, trying to say something to the curious and frightening protagonist. But all her thoughts were occupied with the fact that the red-haired lady might think that she was the killer. She even imagined how the maids were already tying her up and taking her away from her rich, carefree life to prison when she herself tried to scream and tell everyone that she was not guilty, but absolutely no one believed her. But when she was becoming more and more immersed in the stasis and imagining them in her head, to her horror, she noticed in front of her that the red-haired lady looked at her dress in surprise and gasped, because she noticed something terrifying for every normal person. When drops of tears fell from the face of the already stunned and angry Isila, and she looked at Karen, she heard from her that her whole dress was covered in blood, which made the blonde even more worried about being mistaken for a murderer. The girl began to hastily try to tidy herself up, but it was all in vain, because of which she simply looked at her Vidi, tried to come up with an excuse but stuttered and could not utter even a word from fear and pain. But when she realized that it seemed that everything was lost and the red-haired lady definitely considered her a murderer, she did not expect at all that Karen would remain calm and would even extend her a helping hand, offering to get up and go to her room together. Stunned by such words, the blonde again raised her head to the girl and asked her what she meant, as if she did not believe that she was hearing such calm words on this terrible and nightmarish night, which she would dream of in terrible dreams and, it seemed, all her life. But this is exactly what Karen, ruthless to everyone, is trying to achieve. But what surprised Isila even more was that the red-haired lady, whom she had previously considered her greatest rival, smiled at her more times than anyone else had in recent times. Karen did so this time as well, telling her that she would keep her secret no matter what. Isila still raised her hand to accept help from Karen, but she looked at her with bewilderment, asking what secret she was talking about, as if she already guessed that the black-haired lady was clearly thinking about something of her own. But when the lady helped Isila to stand up and looked at her slyly, she calmly answered with a question, asking the blonde if she had started menstruating, since her whole dress was covered in blood, which made the lady look at her in shock. Already in a dark room, clean and without any hints of blood, the girls talked about what happened, while Isila's dress, stained with blood, hung on the back of the chair, and Karen told her that she was surprised when she saw bloody footprints leading to her room. Helping the blonde button up her new chemo nightgown from behind, the red-haired lady told the lady that she was still happy to help no matter what. But Isila remained silent, as if she was uncomfortable in the company of the strange heroine. And while Karen smiled feignedly and very strangely, helping Isila get dressed, the blonde clearly did not trust her and closed her eyes, thinking about why she didn't know anything, and whether it was she who had arranged everything if she was behaving so strangely. So she decided to turn to Karen and honestly admit to her that, in fact, something more terrible than the onset of menstruation had happened in her room, to which the red-haired madam again responded calmly, asking what she meant. But this did not make Isila feel any better. And as soon as the girl remembered for just one moment what she saw in her room, her whole body began to shake with anxiety. And she herself thought that Karen did not even imagine what a nightmare she had imagined to behold. She also remembered her necklace, which lay right next to the head of the corpse with wide-open eyes, and which she had tried so desperately to find. But now she was even afraid to enter her chambers and even more so to take the thing in her hands. Having decided to invite the blonde to sit down on the sofa and calmly tell her everything that had happened, the red-haired lady sat down next to her and asked what was troubling her so much, while Isila could not muster the courage to begin the story and tell the lady her terrible story. And when Karen asked her if she had also seen a corpse in her room, asking so calmly and curiously, the blonde shuddered just from the mention of those terrible events, and in response, surprisingly asked Karen what she meant. But instead of panicking in the same way, Karen just started smiling and telling Isila about the ghosts that live in the castle and wake up at night, scaring everyone who comes to live there. This surprised Isila so much that she could not find the words to speak, looking at Karen with her mouth open and asking her what she had just said, as if the behavior of the already strange Karen frightened her even more and made her suspect her of the most terrible things. However, Karen continued to play the mystical leoi, touching the dishes with purple flowers with her fingers, telling Isila in complete silence that she also has visions about this. And it is true, they say that ghosts really live here. Taking one of the flowers that the lady had brought to her cup, the red-haired lady told Isel with a grin that this was a common occurrence and that over time she would get used to it, as if a severed head and a bloody floor were the order of things. Karen slowly poured boiling water into the cup with the flour, while the blonde continued to doubt everything and think harder and more anxiously about what had happened. but still decided to hesitantly ask the lady about the visions she had spoken about earlier. And she still decided to believe the main character, counting everything she saw in her room as visions, which is why she raised her chin high and convinced herself that she simply had a nightmare due to extreme fatigue and stress in a new place. Only after that did she smile sweetly, asking the main character if she could take her to the room, because she would be a little scared to go back to where she had seen something terrible and almost real. And to this, the protagonist responded that she would do it with pleasure, also smiling at Isila in response. But the blonde did not suspect that behind this grin were hidden the personal motives of the crazy lady to quickly take revenge on everyone in the most nightmarish ways. Sometime later, the two ladies were already in front of Isila's room door, about to enter it. But before that, the polite and calm heroine told the blonde not to be afraid, to which the still intimidated Isila replied that she would try to do it. The first to touch the door handle was the red-haired lady, who already intended to see the results of her crimes in the room, which was why she was so upset. But she tried to convince Isila that all this was just a vision. Isila was still afraid to look into the darkness because she was terrified to see in that room a bed and a person's head, which looked at her with its terrible eyes and had her necklace in front of it. But because of this, she wanted to convince herself more and more that she was imagining everything. The first to enter the room with confident and wide steps was the main character, who wanted to see with her own eyes the most terrible chambers in the castle at that moment. But it seemed that the blood had disappeared somewhere. Entering Isila's room, the two girls truly saw that there was nothing in the chambers. The bed was made, the carpet and the entire floor were perfectly washed, and there was nothing extra on the chairs. While on the bed, a simple cap was visible, next to which something was clearly shining. And Isila's necklace, which she had been so afraid to take earlier, was shining next to him, and now she saw it only next to the headdress, which she clearly saw in the darkness as a severed head, which is why Isila felt relieved. Isila entered the room and began to look around with joy in her soul and with slight shock, surprised by everything around her and calming down, realizing that everything was fine. Even her favorite necklace was lying on the bed in a cap. Exhaling a sigh of happiness and calm, Isila smiled and closed her eyes, telling the main character that what happened to her was very strange. But she was glad that everything ended up being expensive, and also thanked her for walking her to her room. After that, with a smile on her face, she lifted the cap and saw her favorite necklace, telling Karen, who suddenly became silent, that it seemed that it was this headdress on the bed that frightened her, which is why she began to see strange images. She took the necklace in her hands and began to examine it with a satisfied smile on her face, not paying attention to the quiet Karen and thinking with happiness that perhaps she had been very worried because of that strange maid with a dark braid, whose name she still didn't know, although it didn't bother her. However, when she finally turned to the red-haired girl and asked her if she could spend the night with her because she was still afraid to be alone in the room, the protagonist did not answer, creating a dead silence. Noticing that her friend was strangely silent and not even moving, the blonde turned to her and noticed that the lady was actually standing as if something had made her freeze as she silently looked at Isila in the dark room. The thing is, the girl looked at Isila with such empty, crazy, and inhuman eyes that it would have scared anyone of death, because on her face one could read the surprise that drove her crazy, which she never experienced again. Isila froze in the same way out of animal fear, not even understanding what had happened to Karen and what was on her mind, because only because of her deep silence and gaze, everything around was filled with an ominous aura that did not bode well. But Isila decided not to hesitate and not to panic, and then she went up to Karen in order to grab her tightly by the arm and start shaking her, trying to call her by name and understand if she was feeling ill, and if the ghost she had talked about earlier had accidentally entered her. Only after this did Karen suddenly come to her senses and began to smile again, calmly telling Isila that everything was fine and that she was just thinking about something, also saying that tomorrow she would clean everything up here. But this made Isila even more suspicious. The wild smile and stunned eyes from the intense shock still remained on her face, but there was calm and politeness in her voice because she was telling Isila to go to bed, because it was already late at night, and they had to get up early. And after Isila went to Karen's room so that they could sleep there together, the red-haired lady was left with great shock, completely alone in the quiet room without a single source of light, sitting on the bed and asking herself where that very head that was definitely there could have gone. With her black eyes, she looked at the clean bed and asked herself where Nancy's head was, which had definitely been here before and was flaunting itself on the bed with a necklace, which was driving the protagonist more and more crazy. Because of this, the lady remembered the events that had happened earlier, namely, how she had stolen the personal servant in order to be alone with her, putting her head on her lap and tying a rag over her mouth, starting to talk sweetly to her, while Nancy was increasingly panicking and wanted to get out. While Karen calmly and sweetly touched the face of the already stunned and worried Nancy, she told her how glad she was that she had taken the sleeping pill without thinking, thanks to which she found herself in her captivity. But on the main character's face, there was only a manic smile, with which she looked her victim in the eyes and honestly told him that since today was Sunday and she had a day off, no one would notice that she was missing. With her head slightly tilted towards Nancy, who was still unable to speak, tied up and stunned by what had happened, Karen hummed various melodies with her eyes closed and sometimes admired her personal servant, the first victim. Hugging her head so tightly that Nancy was afraid of suffocating, the protagonist told her with a smile that she had never killed anyone for 100 years, so she would not spare her, but still asked if she wanted to die quickly and painlessly. Also, after the smiling and crazy girl confessed in a scary voice that he had died many times already, Nancy could not stand it and twitched, trying to say something, which is why the red-haired killer held her tighter, asking what she didn't like. Deciding to give in, the red-haired lady suddenly released Nancy from her murderous embrace, causing her to fall to the floor with a crash. But that was exactly what the heroine wanted, because with a calm face she told her that she would let her free herself if that was what she wanted. And Nancy still hoped that she would be able to escape from the crazy lady, so she tried to be strong and twitch, despite the pain and shock she was experiencing. But as soon as she fell to the floor, she saw a beautiful necklace right in front of her, sparkling in the sun, and she immediately recognized it as Isila's very jewelry, which the lady was now so desperately looking for, which is why she wanted to say something, but could not do so because of the fabric that covered her mouth. Demonstratively taking the fallen jewel into her hands, the red-haired lady stood up from her seat and looked at her maid with a smile, telling her that she had not changed at all in any of her lives. After that, moving a little away from the fallen Nancy, the protagonist threw the decoration on the floor and told her first victim that if this was her first murder, she would do it properly, in a proper way. And the unfortunate servant wanted to reach out to the necklace with her hand, hoping that if she did this, she would be able to save herself. But this turned out to be far from the case. No matter how much effort she put into covering it, her hand could not grab the necklace. Nancy tried her best to reach for the jewel as if it was her only salvation, but she had no idea that when beads of sweat were running down her face and she was blushing with a rag covering her mouth, Karen was thus only mocking her with a smile. Because suddenly the main character, without any pity, pulled the cloth so tightly on herself that Nancy, who felt the cloth on her neck, immediately stopped breathing and began to choke, which made Karen only smile and watch her first victim die. But now, when the protagonist is alone in the room and the force, she clutched the bed in anger and remembered how clearly she felt Nancy's labored breathing, saw how she was dying, and now she doesn't understand where her head could have gone. With sharp movements of her hands, having torn off the entire sheet and blanket from the bed, the red-haired heroine spoke to herself, saying that she clearly saw how she killed Nancy. But now she cannot understand where she disappeared to if she was the only one who killed her. Imagining the face of a frightened Isila when she said that she saw a corpse in her chambers, the red-haired girl was struck by an idea, because she immediately understood that this blonde was clearly so frightened for a reason. Also remembering how she looked at her with her scary eyes, glowing in the dark, when she watched Isila clutching her head in fear, the girl realized that she clearly could not participate in Nancy's scalp if she herself was horrified by what happened. Out of rage, the main character tore up the entire bed and began to scream, asking herself and the whole world who dared to steal Nancy from her, and thereby ruin all the fun that she had so carefully planned and desired. Having poured out all her discontent and anger, the exhausted lady fell to the floor and told herself that it was a failure, because even her very first murder, which she had planned down to the smallest detail, did not go according to plan. Out of despair and sadness, the girl leaned forward and did not rise again, talking to herself in the dark room about how she had spent half an hour with Isila, but in the end it was all in vain. If now the room was clean, and instead of a head there was a cap on the bed. There really wasn't even a drop of blood on the bed, which would at least hint that something terrible had happened here, which was why the lady was upset, realizing that the whole room looked perfectly clean, which made her think that someone could have cleaned it up before she and Isila arrived. Looking at the floor, the main character fell silent in silence and asked herself the most important question regarding whether her murder of Nancy was real, or whether everything, from beginning to end, was a figment of her imagination. Clutching the train of her white dress in desperation, the heroine asked herself whether her sweet revenge was just an illusion that only emphasized that she had gone mad because of the endless number of defeats and nightmarish deaths. She began to cry, clutch her head, and laugh madly, at the same time telling herself that she was definitely crazy if she was capable of inventing a murder from beginning to end that was not really a cattle murder, or at least it seemed so to her. In the end, she smiled, hiccuping in the dark room from all the horror and also realizing that she absolutely did not care how crippled she was, because she did not want to experience humiliation and be a victim for others anymore. Raising her fist sharply above herself, she shouted to herself, never again to imagine what does not exist, never to deceive herself with visions, and to do what will be real, intending to hurt herself. And she slammed her fist on the wooden floor with all her might, in order to bring herself to her senses and bring herself to her senses, as if this would help her not to make mistakes again and not to succumb to illusions that only make everything worse. When blood began to slowly appear on the main character's fist, and she did not raise her head, she told herself that next time she would kill Nancy again in Isila's room, no matter what it cost her, and no matter what hallucinations she had. Raising her hand and examining it, realizing that bruises and redness were slowly appearing on it as well, the girl continued talking to herself, convincing herself that in this case she would not be able to fulfill her promise. Raising her head and looking at the empty room in which there was no one except her, the girl promised herself that in this case she would try to kill the man again, to be true to herself and to do what she had planned earlier. Understanding that this time they wanted to choose another victim, she went out into the corridor and began to walk slowly until she met a butler on her way, who noticed the lady from afar and therefore walked towards her confidently. At first, he was surprised because he saw the young lady at such a late hour not in her room, which is why he greeted her with a surprised look on his face, as if asking her what she was doing there, finding it suspicious. In response, looking at the butler named Bowen, the red-haired lady thought that she did not expect to see him here earlier than usual, because with each past life she knew that he would appear a little later than this time. But she also did not expect at all that when the man came closer to her, he would grab her hand and ask why she was covered in bruises and wounds, not realizing that earlier the lady herself had hit the floor with that same palm. He even said that he was ready to help her bandage all the wounds and treat them. But the lady did not like this either, which is why she looked at him with emotions of disgust and hostility, as if she did not need anything from him at first. She was tired of seeing the intrusive butler in front of her, so she abruptly pulled her hand towards herself, forcing the guy to let go of her and ordering the servant in a rude tone not to touch her anymore, which apparently angered Bowen. But when she looked at him and touched her palm, which seemed to hurt even more because the guy grabbed it, she did not expect that Dulan would appear behind her, looking at his bride in surprise and anger, realizing that the servant was touching her. Remembering that in his past lives and in the plot of the novel itself, Dulan acted insecurely. Although he tried to point the finger at others and protect the heroine, while feigning jealousy, he felt nothing for Karen, which is why he was simply an annoying person. Then and now, the lady did not expect anything from the angry Dulan and was calm, realizing that most likely this guy would simply yell at the butler or say some threatening words to him, while trying to look intimidating. But when Dulan continued to stand menacingly, the lady herself decided to order the butler to leave, giving him the task of bringing Miss Isila's breakfast to her chambers when she would be having breakfast in the hall, after which she insistently asked to be left alone with her fiancé. After this, the butler quickly turned around and walked back with such a quick step that it was as if he was running, so as not to receive punishment or a reprimand from the lady and her fiancé, and they stood at him and watched as the servant gradually disappeared from sight. But when Dulan looked askance at the lady and asked her if she was trying to protect him from that butler by such an act, the red-haired lady turned away from him and sighed, not understanding how fate had brought her together with such a man as a preacher in the church. And before they parted again, the heroine suddenly put her hand on his shoulder and thus forced him to return, while she told him not to forget to pray today. And in a couple of hours, she would come into his room to exchange words. However, Karen herself did not expect that the previously withdrawn and unremarkable Dulan, who was never interested in anything, would suddenly grab her hand with his intentions, which is why the heroine would even be scared, but would be much more outraged by this. Frowning with anger, she looked into his eyes and wanted to pull her hand back, but she was unable to do so because the guy was grabbing it too tightly, which made the lady wonder what right he had to hold her. But, as it turned out, He just wanted to look at her wounded hand and, with slight shyness, offer her to bandage the wounds and treat them. Because no matter what kind of relationship they had, Goyim are still considered a couple and even take care of each other. And after some time, when the protagonist could not refuse Dulan, they still found themselves in a spacious office where they sat by the fireplace, and the guy began to bandage the lady's palm in awkward silence and light crackling of burning wood. Sometimes, when the lady was in too much pain from the application of medicine to her wounds, she would tell her fiancé about it with an unpleasant expression on her face, and he would remain silent, continuing to heal the main character's injuries with trepidation and caution. He did not take his black eyes off the girl's wounds and examine them, realizing that they were too big and deep, apologizing for causing the lady inconvenience, and then continued to help her with more careful movements. And after that, when silence fell between the couple, when Dulan sold the heroine's wounds with medicine and the lady remained silent, Karen suddenly realized that although his kindness had never touched her, now she felt that their relationship had changed. She had a great desire to make sure that this was so, because the lady suddenly leaned so close to Dulan that he was frightened, leaning back when the girl wanted to charm him with her smile and asked him if she was beautiful. In front of him was a truly amazing lady who could charm anyone with her deep red hair, sweet smile, and bright eyes as she looked at the amazed Dulan and asked him for the second time if she was beautiful to him. But the behavior of the main character surprised Dulan so much that he blushed like a tomato, even sweating, asking the lady why she was doing this and what she wanted to achieve, because the lady had never behaved like this before. At this moment, the protagonist remembered a moment in her life where she dragged Dulan around with her before trying something new with him for the first time, and this is exactly what she wants to thank him for, realizing that Dulan seems to be the only one who has changed and has not become like in the story. Therefore, the lady decided, without any ulterior motives, to take Dulan's hand in her own and raise it to her face, because now she wants not just to have fun with him, but to tease him, and at the same time thank him for the new, previously unseen sensations. Telling Dulan that he was her fiancé and therefore there was nothing wrong with what she was doing now, the red-haired lady sweetly and tenderly kissed her man's pale hand, which was covered with an accrued facial scar. With the goal of provoking the guy as well, the lady looked at him with a charming smile and shining violet eyes, thus waiting for the moment when her fiancé would realize that there could be something more between them than a marriage contract on paper. And the protagonist managed to achieve what she wanted. I remember that Dulan grabbed her head from behind with his hand and pulled her towards himself, which surprised and slightly scared Karen, but her fiancé only wanted to kiss her. His cheeks turned red as he kissed the girl longer and longer, but the main character liked it because she wants to change everything, even wanting to be conquered by Dulan, the stolen bride of the main character named Raymond, whom she met in every life, but each time she died in agony. Her hands were already reaching for Dulan's neck to wrap their arms around him and hug him, while she only wanted everything to be different this time, because she wanted to change everything as drastically as possible, wanting to be with someone who was close to her and not with the previously written too perfect hero. And she hugged him as tightly as she could, while the guy continued to kiss her, while the girl dreamed not only of living her life with sweet revenge, but also of feeling such an unusual love that would make her live with her beloved all her life and die together on the same day. And the next day, when Isila acted as if nothing had happened and sang different melodies with a smile, telling her friend that she was incredibly happy with the necklace that had finally been found, melodic piano music was playing in the room with her. And at that time, a red-haired lady was sitting quietly next to her, playing the piano and listening to the words of the blonde, who was cheerfully and in an upbeat mood telling Karen what kind of necklace she could definitely buy for a house in the capital itself, also bragging that this jewel was given to her by her fiancé. Karen seemed to ignore all of this because she was only looking at the piano keys and continued to play her fingers on the piano, creating unique music and indifferently answering Isila that she was very happy for her, although in fact this was not the case. Imagining behind the most beautiful Isila a hero of the novel named Raymond, who supposedly will forever remain in the shadows, not showing his face, while his supposedly beloved bride almost glows from the gifted jewelry and dresses, remembering that in fact the groom never talked about marriage and did not promise Isila anything. That's why now the red-haired lady turned to the blonde and wondered if Isila herself didn't notice that her fiancé was clearly not telling her everything. But at that time, the blonde raised her chin high and told her friend that Raymond was completely different from everyone else. But noticing that Karen seemed indifferent to everything she said, Isila turned suspiciously to her and thought about why she did not envy her anywhere. Because in her life, she had never been given so many gifts as she had been given in a couple of years. Noticing that the main character had a bandage on her palms, through which the wounds on her fingers, which she used to play the piano, were still visible, Isila thought that Karen was very arrogant if she ignored her, not even paying attention to her wounds. The blonde decided to sit down next to her and ask why she plays this instrument now. If in the world she has long felt the piano, popular with everyone, to which the red-haired lady replied that she has been playing it since childhood and she likes it better this way. But the blonde still didn't lag behind, asking the protagonist if she wanted to be given a new piano, since all the keys on this piano were already worn out. But Karen indifferently answered that this was not worth doing, because she liked her old piano. And although the girl was upset, realizing that any help she gave Kaken was in vain, she still remembered yesterday evening when she helped her button up her nightgown, which is why she now understands that her care then made her happy. Remembering the strange vision in which she saw Nancy's braid and next to it her necklace, she sadly and warily remembered that Karen even walked her to her room, which was important to her. Isila wanted to quickly forget about that terrible hallucination that she saw in her room, but sometimes she still glanced at the maids who were in the room with her and realized that she really hadn't seen that servant with dark hair lately. Then she decided to sit down next to the red-haired lady and ask her where her personal maid had gone. But Karen didn't react to this in any way and continued playing the piano and asking Isila if she meant Nancy. With a slight indignation on her face, the main character looked at her interlocutor and admitted to her that it seemed that her personal maid did not want to appear in front of her after yesterday, hinting that the blonde had acted a little rudely towards her. But in response, the girl with golden hair said that this was unlikely to be the case, also waving her hand, which is why the indignant and even more angry Karen fell silent, looking at her with furrowed brows, trying to withstand Isila's character. However, there was, as it turned out, another meaning in her words, because the lady with blue eyes looked at the floor and said that her obsession, which she had managed to see earlier, was too terrible to consider the servant simply missing because of it. And when Isila confessed to the main character that she had seen that same maid with her throat cut, Karen looked at her with a shocked look, which clearly depicted horror and shock, because she had previously thought that the blonde had no idea about something terrible. Immediately after this, Isila calmly spread her hands and turned away from Karen, saying that she knew that it sounded like nonsense, but she still decided to share with her visions and experiences on this matter. But in her head, the protagonist already remembered how she looked at her first victim with a crazy smile, perfectly recalling that she strangled Nancy and did not cut her throat. And therefore for her these are not simple words, although for Isila they are a trifle. In her mind's eye, she had images of Nancy's neck already darkening with bruises and abrasions caused by the rag around her neck. But now she wondered who had done this to her servant, if now even she was not sure that she had killed her. That's why she fell to the floor with her eyes painted on and began to frantically think about who could have done this to the servants, if, as it turned out, she wasn't the only one who would try to become a murderer with harsh methods of reprisal. After some time had passed, after the blonde and the main character had been studying music, Isila was alone in a bright room, where she was walking back and forth, clearly thinking about something too hard and excitedly. The thing is that Isila was biting her nails from stress and could not understand where the maid had gone, whom she had previously hit on the cheek, because now her disappearance did not seem simple and uninteresting to her, because there was clearly something strange and suspicious about it. Looking at her bed, which was clean and tidy again, although just a night ago she had seen it in the most terrible state, bloody and with her head on the blanket, the blonde realized that she would not calm down until she saw Nancy with her own eyes. The lady looked at her bed, touched its headboard, and still thought about Nancy as her main problem, because of which she could get into trouble. But the main thing for her now is where she could go if even Karen does not give her clear answers. Remembering the girl's smile and the moment when she turned to her to tell her about the necklace that she had not seen, Isila realized that after that day no one had met her. It was as if she had disappeared without a trace. After that, the blonde, upset by the whole situation, angrily looked out the window and began to examine the view of nature, making sure that everything was becoming as strange as possible from the day she arrived at this strange palace. And outside the window, the girl saw the top of a strange tree without leaves, which seemed to her even stranger and mysterious against the background of white clouds that completely covered the sky, like in the scariest horror movies. However, when she heard a sudden creak behind her, so loud that she herself was frightened, The blonde decided to immediately turn around and look at the source of the sound, hoping not to see something terrible again. But all her worries were in vain, because the noise was made by the burning fireplace, the wood in which was slowly burning, turning into ashes, because of which the frightened blonde only understood that fear was haunting her more and more often, as was paranoia. She sighed with relief and closed her eyes, trying to bring her breathing back to normal and realizing that now, because of the terrible events, she would see something paranormal in every, even the most ordinary thing or phenomenon. However, as soon as she was distracted and calmed down for even 1 second, she immediately heard another door creak behind her, as if someone was breaking into her room, which made the lady shudder and become frightened with a stunned face. It was the listener who looked at the lady with the letter in her hand and told her that she had received a telegram from someone, which was good news for Isila, because it turned out that the sender of the letter was an important person to her. Because on the envelope itself there was a beautiful inscription, like the signature of the sender, which only proved that the letter was sent to her by Raymond himself, who is Isila's favorite fiancé, so much so that the lady already considers him her future husband. As soon as the maid told the mistress such joyful news for her, she instantly forgot about all the fears and paranoia she had had earlier, because she turned to the maid with sincere joy, even jumping up and down and blushing, intending to quickly find out what Raymond had written to her. So she simply extended her hand to the servant and with an angry look silently ordered her to immediately give her the letter, remembering that she was not just a lady, but a high-ranking mistress who alone treated everyone strictly and in an aristocratic manner, as Isila herself believed. A couple of days after Isila received her favorite letter from Raymond, the main character was spending time quietly in her palace. The heroines decided to go to a beautiful place, namely a city with markets and fairs, which is why one of them admired, saying that it is really beautiful here. The blonde with green eyes, who goes by the name Donna and who at 18 years old is the protagonist's laundress and personal maid, looked at the city with sparkling eyes and could not take her eyes off it, while the red-haired madam walked calmly behind her. And while Donna wanted to get acquainted with the city as soon as possible, Karen had her own goals, because under the guise of a walk, she wanted to attend the coming-of-age ceremony and thereby understand where to do Nancy, also remembering that she tried many times to escape from the ceremony into the forest, but each time she died, meeting different faces of doors there. But now the main character already knew that everything would be different, because instead of Nancy, she took Donna with her, who at that time was looking at a stall with jewelry that was sold by a cute grandmother with gray hair. The lady also watched as a guy approached the saleswoman, blushing sweetly and pointing at one piece of jewelry with his finger, already throwing a coin to the grandmother in order to buy a hairpin that Donna liked, which is why she looked at the guy with curiosity. And Karen looked at the young couple who first met because the guy gave the lady jewelry and confessed to her that he liked her. But while they were talking, the protagonist was sad, realizing that she liked Nancy more than Donna, and she was also bored because she had already seen this in previous lives. Covering her face with her hand, the red-haired lady looked at him calmly and thought that the only thing that made her happy was that now everything was not as boring and unambiguous as it had been before, thanks to which she was curious to live on. And when she was walking around the market with Donna and following her everywhere, thinking that something unusual was going to happen on that very day, she noticed that her personal maid approached the butler and began to beg him to visit the circus, which is why he refused, because this was not the plan for their trip. Karen watched this picture silently, remembering that she herself had never been to the circus with Nancy, because they only went to a concert and therefore, it seems, she is also interested in going to a new place, like Donna. So she decided to support Donna's idea, who was practically glowing with happiness, telling the butler that they really wanted to go to the circus, which forced him to turn away and silently fulfill their requests. And when they both managed to persuade the butler to buy them tickets to the next circus performance, they decided to spend time in one store, where they walked next to the salesman behind the counter, when Donna admitted to Karen that she didn't think her idea would work. The red-haired lady looked at the goods and asked her friend why she thought so, to which Donna replied, looking at the white feather in front of her, that she didn't think that they would go to the circus for the reason that she was used to the fact that no one fulfilled the servants' requests. The girl also suddenly placed a hat on the red-haired main character's head, examining it to see if it suited her, and asking if she thought there were too many servants in the estates, which caused the surprised heroine to ask what she meant. Donna indignantly straightened her pink hat on Karen and told her that the owners continue to hire a lot of servants even when they have enough of them. But the protagonist listened to her with closed eyes, not understanding what she wanted to say. In response, the red-haired lady also began to put different hats on Donna's head when she told how when Mr. Evans came to their palace with his daughter Isila, even that number of servants began to be insufficient. Even when the girl asked Donna if she was being forced to work harder, she replied that it was not about that at all and blushed a little, as if embarrassed to tell Karen the truth, shyly trying on her hat on her head. Remembering the number of people who had arrived with Mr. Verdick and his daughter, who looked like a crowd of dark silhouettes, the girl suddenly said that a bunch of servants had also arrived with them, so now they needed 3 times more laundry to wash, which sounded strange. And at that moment, she turned to Karen as if in a white guise, hinting that she could become white as a ghost due to so much work. But for Karen, it was still strange to hear from her a word regarding the servants. Donna began to grab the Lord in his arms and beg him to tell her when the guests would leave their mansion, as if that was all she was waiting for. To which the red-haired lady, looking to the side, replied that she wanted to believe that they would leave soon, but she couldn't promise anything. Also, when Karen remembered that, in fact, according to the plot, the Evans family will not leave them until the moment when they are all destroyed as enemies, she noticed that Donna next to her began to talk about how a certain Sarah recently complained about Isila, which interested Karen. Imagining a silver tray in her hands, Donna Sarah indignantly told her mistress that Isila disliked one servant only because she did not bring her a letter on a silver plate and did not present it to her in such a beautiful form, but simply accepted it in her hands. In response, the red-haired lady only laughed, saying that her family, the Hares, was poor enough to allow their guests to bring their things on silver and gold trays. Karen's words made Donna think and say that she didn't mean at all that her family was very poor. But the red-haired lady didn't like that she didn't laugh at her joke, so she leaned over with no fear and whispered to laugh. And after that, Donna began to laugh as loudly and feignedly as she could, while the protagonist silently looked at her from the side and covered her mouth in surprise, because the maid behaved this way for the reason that she forgot that Karen was a mistress, and not her friend, and therefore her orders must be followed unquestioningly. She turned to her sweetly and, with a blush on her face from embarrassment, asked if she was joking, continuing to laugh and have a good time with the red-haired madam. They both laughed heartily, and it seemed like all the problems disappeared somewhere when Karen allowed herself to enjoy a walk, at least on this day, even if not with her loved one, but with the one who gives her smiles and a good mood in such a terrible fate with its nightmarish events. And even when she looked at the fair-haired Donna, who was looking at a variety of hats and other headwear in the store, she thought that nothing special would happen here, because Donna would turn out to be an ordinary maid. But everything turned out differently. Karen couldn't take her satisfied, smiling eyes off sweet Donna as he handed her other hats and told her which ones were better, thinking that perhaps Nancy's death had clearly changed something, even for the better. She loved trying on all sorts of hats on Donna's head, which she did with a smile, making the pigtailed lady blush and look at herself in the mirror with fascination, when the red-haired lady thought that she had even forgotten about the eternally perfect Raymond. That is why she looked with a charming smile at the maid whom she liked much more than the same Raymond, who, unlike her, was able to bring something new and cheerful into her life, something that would later make her happy. But suddenly all her thoughts and dreams were interrupted by Donna's words, which made her look at the fair-haired lady. And the whole point was that she took into her hands an unprepossessing, not very beautiful scarf, asking what assessment she would give to this thing. And while the red-haired lady looked at Drenna and sincerely did not understand why she liked such a beautiful scarf, Donna herself said that she really wanted to give it to a certain Madame Dear, but Karen asked in response if she knew her. When Donna happily told Karen that of course she knew her because everyone knew Mom Dear, the protagonist was noticeably upset, silently thinking that she had no idea what Lady Dear her friend was talking about. As a result, the red-haired lady began to think, trying to remember who Donna was talking about. And at that time, the lady in the light dress herself asked the lady why she didn't remember her, because Madame Dear had been her mentor 8 years ago. Realizing that she didn't remember any mentor because it seemed like she was with her before she moved into Karen's body, Donna began to spin around, trying to dance and telling the heroine that it was Dear who taught her etiquette and ballroom dancing. And then the main character decided to make Hades remember her, exclaiming with surprise that she remembered her, although in fact she had no idea about the memories that the past Karen had. The blonde lady exclaimed with joy and delight, saying that she knew that Miss Dear lived not far from here, and that's why she thought that the protagonist would want to visit her. But it seems, as she said, she thinks that she was wrong, judging by the lady's reactions. At this point, the red-haired main Egern seriously thought about it, Because thanks to the plot, she knows that Miss Deer worked in her family's estates for 8 years. But in 100 years, she hears her name for the first time when she spent several dozen lives in the world. She looked out the window and noticed that there were people there who lived their lives, passed by her, and did not suspect anything. While Karen thought that even though these were ordinary people who were just a trifle to her, here every nonsense was actually important. And she smiled sincerely, looking at them and understanding that this was not a minus for her. Because even the smallest change in the world could save her from death and change the plot forever, if she had never managed to do this before. The lady's thoughts were interrupted when the butler burst into the shop and shouted to the girls that the circus show was about to start, and therefore they needed to hurry immediately, which delighted Donna, who even jumped up and down with joy and was ready to see the show as soon as possible. And Donna hurried out of the store onto the street as quickly as possible, turning to the red-haired lady and telling her to run as quickly as possible. But Karen, unlike her friend, was much calmer, because her thoughts made her behave more restrainedly. The thing is that she was looking at the sky with her violet eyes and thinking about the mysterious Madame Deer, who is even more mysterious and incomprehensible to the heroine than she is herself, and she wonders if she might not meet her. Her silhouette even appeared in her head, like a shadow, which made the lady think about what she could change in her life, whether she could do it at all and what she looked like if she had never appeared or even been mentioned before in 100 years. And she smiled at the sky so joyfully and with warm clothes that everything around seemed to shine brighter, because she thought that she really wanted to meet her, because now it was she who could change her life for the better. After some time, the main character was already in the circus and was looking at an acrobat in a black dress and was about to jump down from a height. But before that, the lady cheerfully waved her hand to all the spectators while the light was directed at her. Without hesitation, the acrobat jumped and spread her arms so freely that this alone surprised everyone. But it only made the protagonist think that she also felt like this, only without insurance and with the knowledge that she would die. While the acrobat's face was filled with joy and happiness, because she was absolutely sure that she would show everyone her skill and fearlessness without risking her life, Karen remembered that, unfortunately, even after she had fallen in the same way, she had not managed to die instantly, becoming crippled. She even had fleeting and very quick memories in her head of her red hair fluttering in the wind as she fell and hoping that this would be the end of her suffering. But to her regret, all the horror would continue again. But the acrobat knew for sure that she would not repeat the fate of the main character, because suddenly someone caught her by the hand so sharply and firmly that she stopped falling, saving the girl from falling. The brunette was hanging upside down on the ramp and holding on with his legs, grabbing his stunt partner by the hands while she herself smiled sweetly at everyone and wasn't even afraid of anything, demonstrating her skill to everyone, which is capable of shocking everyone, or at least surprising them. And while all the spectators looked at the pair of acrobats with surprise and delight, watching their tricks with the words that many thought they would fall, and others just watched and were mesmerized, Karen herself thought that she had fallen in the same way, but no one took her hand in order to save her. After that, the girl continued to perform increasingly dangerous and colorful tricks, for example, doing a backflip right in the air, which caused delight in everyone. Many clapped loudly and gasped in surprise, but not the main character, in whose soul there was, it seemed, darkness due to memories of the past. The lady began to close her eyes and lower her head down, because she felt bad mentally and she wanted to calm down quickly and get rid of the terrible thoughts and concentrate on the spectacle for which she came here, because she was even seeing it for the first time in her life. And when a nice guy was passing by the rows, shouting to everyone that he was selling beer and other cold drinks, the red-haired lady raised her hand and shouted for him to come here, which surprised Donna and the butler, who were standing next to her. Having told the guy that she wanted 1 glass of beer, the girl had already extended her hands towards him, intending to take it, while the seller was only too happy to give the rich-looking lady a glass of alcohol, telling her not to spill the whole drink on the floor. The butler began frantically throwing 3 coins onto the seller's tray as payment, while the protagonist was already drinking and listening to his conversation with Donna, saying that she also wanted a glass of beer. But the servant told her that she still had to work, and therefore she was not allowed to drink. Even the main character was only allowed 1 glass. But her attention quickly shifted when the host loudly announced to all the guests of the show the appearance of the main participant of the program, which caused the purple-eyed lady to look down, right at the stage, to see an interesting character. Because on the stage, the girl saw a large and decorated with different red patterns, words with large and long tusks, the size of which surprised every viewer. and they already expected to see many tricks with such an unusual animal as an elephant. The elephant stood on the stage looking at everyone present, while each spectator admired its size and shouted that it was of incredible size, and some of them even got up from their seats to look at it and clap their hands. And while the butler was telling the surprised main character that this animal is called an elephant and that it uses its trunk as a hand, the lady herself looked at him with her jaw dropped, realizing that she was seeing this for the first time, not even noticing that she could spill beer on her dress. While Donna was thinking about how cute the elephant was and Karen was in no hurry to call him Makim, everyone noticed how the big animal knocked down all the chairs that were standing near him as decoration with his long trunk, because he was incredibly angry. He continued to destroy everything in front of him because his trunk easily reached the chairs, which he destroyed with a light movement. But everyone around still wanted to see incredible tricks from such a large and amazing beast, which also has its own character. And the trainer in the red robe also looked at this, who in response only smiled and looked mockingly at the elephant, already holding a whip in his hands, because he was pulling it with his hands and saying that this thing serves him as an excellent cure for disobedience. This did not please the red-haired main character, who already felt in her gut that something bad would happen, and nothing good would come of it if they wanted to beat up the disobedient word, so that he would submit and begin to follow the commands of the person whom she could easily crush. While Karen sat and watched the performance with cold emotions, the trainer had already started to hit the elephant on the back leg so hard that its skin turned red. But he continued to hit it further and further, which made the elephant even more angry. While the elephant looked at the trainer, a confident man who stood there and seemed to know what he was doing, looking at the elephant under the screams of the spectators, the protagonist thought that she was similar to this elephant because fate also makes them suffer, leaving no other choice. And this only made the spectators admire and smile wider, raising their hands up and waving them as if the show had already begun. The fun that was prepared especially for them, which they were enjoying despite the elephant's pain. At that moment, the main character seemed to imagine herself next to the same beast, but not in the arena, but on a clean book and surrounded by spectators, which is why people mentally asked everyone why everyone was laughing if they saw pain and suffering in front of them. And she decided to slowly tilt her shiny glass of beer down a little, causing the light to fall on it, which was exactly what she was trying to achieve, thinking that she wanted to do something that would make things more interesting for everyone. As soon as she did such an action, unnoticed by everyone, the elephant immediately reacted to it because he jerked towards Karen and was already about to look at her with his burning, golden eyes, which were full of anger and fury. He moved from his place without permission, which further angered the already indignant trainer, who now began to shout at the animal and prepare his whip for new beatings, shouting at him that he had done wrong again and was now going to be punished. The butler, Donna, and even the beer seller noticed that the red-haired lady had dropped her glass, which is why they came closer to her, anxiously asking if she was okay. But the heroine remained mysteriously and warily silent. Seemingly indifferent on the outside, but incredibly anxious on the inside, Karen looked at the elephant and asked everyone around her if they could get out of here because it had become very boring. But her words were, to some extent, a lie. Hearing this, Donna, the butler, and the seller were surprised, looking at the red-haired lady and asking her why she decided to say such a thing. Because earlier she herself wanted to come here, and now even the most interesting performance begins. With a tray on which there were other glasses of beer, the seller came closer to the main character and asked if she was unwell, saying that the local performances were really very exciting, but she only closed her eyes and sighed. After that, with a suspicious movement of her hand, she made a strand of her red hair move, which revealed her beautiful and shiny gold earring, while the lady herself looked ahead and seriously told the beer seller that she did not consider the performance worthwhile. And as soon as she showed the whole world her earrings, which sparkled so brightly that anyone could notice them, the elephant moved again, as if noticing them, which is why the trainer began to hit him even harder on the leg for the slightest disobedience. The elephant with golden eyes turned to the main character and looked at her as if he was not a simple animal, because even Karen thought that he was smart enough if he first reacted to her shiny glass and then to her earrings. And the lady continued to look at him with her glowing violet eyes, showing the beast her ear decorations that shone from the slightest light, telling him with a smile that she wanted her expectations to come true. After some time, the elephant looked only at the main character and seemed to be watching only her among the crowd of spectators, which was reflected in his golden eyes, while Karen clearly wanted to achieve some chaos, namely that the animal would no longer obey anyone and wanted freedom. And the elephant seemed to sense all the thoughts of the main German, which is why he suddenly rebelled so much that he raised his big legs and began to trumpet through his trunk, which frightened absolutely all the people and even the trainer, who no longer knew how to subdue the beast. He screamed and tried to understand what was going on, but it was too late for him to even run away, because the elephant's huge leg was already flying towards him in order to crush him in a matter of moments, which caused real fear to appear on the man's face. And after all the people saw with their own eyes the shocking death of the trainer, which occurred instantly due to the leg of a large animal, they immediately got up from their seats and ran to the exit screaming and shouting, which is what one fair-haired man ordered them to do. Having formed a dense crowd, people wanted to leave the place as quickly as possible, shouting all sorts of words due to shock, but due to panic, they were unable to do everything quickly and safely, which is why some had to find other exits. And the butler and Donna stood up and grabbed the main character, telling her to leave the circuses as soon as possible and save herself. But it seemed that the red-haired heroine did not panic and did not even want to leave, because she looked with a smile at how the aggressive elephant wanted to kill everyone. She stood there as if she was doing it all on purpose, while her earrings glowed brighter and brighter, and she smiled, telling the elephant to do whatever he thought was right and to no longer submit to someone who was hurting and humiliating him while everyone around him laughed. She ordered him to destroy everything that was holding him back, and the elephant seemed to hear her thoughts, because the animal smashed everything around him and lifted it up with his long trunk and tusks, all in order to achieve freedom. However, she did not expect at all that the elephant would choose not any other person as the owl's next victim, but her, because he ran at her with all his might, intending to attack Karen as well. The butler and Donna hugged Karen as tightly as they could and turned away from the elephant, preparing to take the full brunt of the blow. But at that moment, the red-haired lady looked at him with crazy eyes, as if she was seeing the last moment of her life. And she didn't even panic at the moment when she saw the elephant's big leg in front of her, which was already flying towards her face and wanted to crush her, because she was only thinking about the fact that she wouldn't be able to escape anywhere anyway, and therefore she accepted this death as a given. She smiled and extended her arms towards him and looked at him with her violet eyes, mentally telling him to always be free, even if she could not escape her fate of always dying and being reborn to suffer. However, this time she failed to predict her death, because the elephant suddenly fell right after the loud bang, causing the butler and Donna to turn to the fallen animal and cover the heroine's eyes, even when she was indignant about it. And as soon as she saw that the elephant was no longer moving, it instantly turned into a lifeless body, under which a huge pool of blood was spreading, which is why the protagonist was sad, realizing that it was all over, and she had not managed to save his life. She looked at him with emptiness and sadness, which is what Donna and the butler were doing behind her, listening to the deathly silence. But at this time, Karen was thinking that she actually knew what happened to the elephant and guessed who killed him. At this time, another person approached them and after what had happened, began to ask the butler and Donna if everything was okay. And at this time, the protagonist already guessed that now the main role would be given to one very interesting figure, whom she actually hates with all her heart. It was this man who grabbed the main character by the hand and dragged her along, while the red-haired lady was still looking at the dead elephant and did not even take her eyes off it, as if there was nothing left in her soul except emptiness. Because near the main entrance to the Upal, from where a bright light emanated, the protagonist had already seen some movement. A silhouette that intended to enter and appear before everyone as a hero who saved everyone from a wild beast. This man has the nicknames Golden Devil and Sharpshooter, and all because of his incredible appearance and skills that amazed the entire public, and it was he who confidently sought to show himself in front of everyone, tapping on the wooden floor with black shoes. The character is so handsome, influential, and simply charming that only his clothes are capable of attracting attention, and all because they had an expensive color, fabric, and gold ornaments, and he was holding a personal gun in his hands, from which he had previously fired. And the main character was thinking about Raymond, the same blonde guy with bright green eyes, who has not only a charming appearance but also excellent shooting skills, which is why Isila fell in love with him. And according to the plot, he is Karen's fiancé. But for now, she doesn't know her name. This is how the circus performance ended, which the main character initially really wanted to go to. But later, it was he who led her with the most hated person for her. But when this happened, evening came and it was time to return home. And along the empty road, on which there was not a single person, the main character walked with quick steps, thinking that this had been brewing since the very first page of the work. so she was not even surprised and even less happy when she saw him. Remembering that very moment when the blonde named Raymond looked at her with his burning eyes, the lady realized that from that very moment, everything would go down the drain and turn into a real hell, and she herself would die, because of which the world would come to its end, because of which she hated it. And at that moment, when he appeared before everyone as a fair-haired hero who could shoot an elephant on the first try and save everyone, and while other people were looking at him, including the butler, the red-haired lady decided to run away, so as not to even talk to him. In her head, she remembered that moment when she had a nice time with Donna, trying on hats on her head and smiling, realizing that now she had to seize her last chance to fix everything, or at least change, because what Donna had told her earlier had incredibly amazed her. The thing is, she also remembered how Donna looked at her with a smile and told her about the mysterious Madame Dear, asking the protagonist why she didn't remember her, because she was her mentor 8 years ago. But now she sees Dear as her chance to change everything. And now she looked angrily ahead and wanted to run away from the circus as quickly as possible, to try once again to destroy the plot and take control of everything. But now she has at least a small hope that everything will work out. She also remembered the elephant with large tusks and colorful patterns on its head, realizing that she had seen this animal for the first time in 100 years. But it had died, and she had not, which meant that for her, this could be a sign that everything could work out. She even imagined how the dying beast was on the page of the book and was bleeding, as if he had now sacrificed his life so that the strength to fight for herself and be free would be born in the protagonist's soul. Thinking that she would find another way out of the situation, she decided to run to a mysterious and dark alley, at the end of which a dead end with a door was visible, where the lady looked, exhaling and inhaling air again. Karen looked angrily at the alley and indignantly realized that she remembered this very place, and unfortunately, it clearly did not carry anything good in it. Because now, when the lady looked at it, she remembered the events of the past. She remembered how in one of her lives she had been attacked in that quiet and deserted alley by 2 men, one of whom had laughed at the girl and held her hands, and the other who had mocked her, already preparing to rob the rich lady. But now she raised her head up and sighed calmly, looking at the sun and thinking that she still had a little time, and besides, she had already met Raymond, and that was the worst thing that could happen. Now she could not be afraid of anything, and she decided to go along this very road even though she knew about the robbers, because at the end of this dark alley she saw a modest and small house, which was what she needed, because the mysterious Madame Dear lives in it, and she can help her. However, she did not even have time to take one step forward towards this house, because right before her eyes a large male hand appeared, and also a cheerful voice of a stranger was heard when he asked the lady where she was in such a hurry. The lady immediately looked at the hand with disgust and incredible anger, because she suddenly realized that she did not even have time to take a step forward, hoping that she would have time, because those who wanted to rob her already wanted to fulfill all their plans. In front of them were the same guys who had robbed her before, smiling and at first very friendly, and therefore circling around her, telling the lady that they saw that she was from a rich mix and therefore wanted to ask her for something. But Karnan was in no hurry to respond to them with mutual politeness. Even when one of them touched the angry girl's face with his finger, she remained silent, while anger was already accumulating in her soul, and the guys cheerfully asked her how old she was and whether she had a husband, without even telling their names or modestly introducing themselves first. With a sharp movement of her hand, the red-haired lady silently forced the dark-haired guy's hand, which they both instantly resented, and the protagonist irritably realized that she had fallen into the same trap for the second time. And when she once again thought about why everything was happening this way, whether it was a result of her going to the circus and whether there would be real changes, one man touched her again and even took her by the cheek, slyly asking the girl what she was thinking about. He looked at Dao with a smile and confessed to her that the longer he looked at her, the more he wanted to do something terrible to her. But upon hearing this, his friend became indignant and hastened to remind his friend that the daughter of a lord was in front of them and they could get into trouble. He also shouted to his friend that in front of them was not just a lady with unusual red hair and purple eyes, and not even a simple daughter of a lord who was the heir of the Hare family, but also a lady blessed by God. Because of the guy's words, the lady remembered herself as a child, when her mother held her and when she was still a small baby with short hair and cute eyes, and even then she was called the luckiest woman in the world. But now, remembering all her lives, the protagonist just laughs, imagining herself completely alone, faceless and so empty that there was not even a hint of sadness, despair, or anger on her face. The lady realized that she had become so lucky that now she could not even lose her life of her own free will. She was pulled out of her thoughts by a sharp push from the man, because he grabbed her by the arms and hung over her, smiling and saying that he would let her go because she was the daughter of a lord, but for a certain price, which made the red-haired lady become even more indignant. Having ordered his friend to find the lady, the brunette continued to hold the main character's hands even when she screamed at them to let her go. But at that time, the fair-haired stranger was already touching her dress in order to find her wallet. And Karen realized that she shouldn't have gone down that path when she heard and felt how the stranger's hands tore the fabric of her dress without hesitation, thanks to which he would be able to find the bag, expecting to receive a large amount of money from it. Having discovered the main character's wallet, the fair-haired guy began to examine it closely and even turn it over, becoming increasingly surprised that it was empty when the protagonist fought with what was holding her hands. Namely, she grabbed him by the hair and threatened to kill him. And only after the brunette's partner was completely convinced that he had found nothing in the wallet, he showed the find to his friend and told him that there was nothing in the wallet, which made the guy instantly indignant and angry, asking how this was possible. Realizing that they would get nothing from the beautiful-looking lady, the brunette let her go, which is why she moved away from them a few steps. And at this time, the partners began to get angry at each other, because earlier one of them himself said that the red-haired lady was the daughter of a lord. As a result, the brunette decided to approach the lady and tear the precious pearl hoop from the top of her head, intending to at least get some benefit from it, and shouting discontentedly at the llama that he did not understand why she was dressed so luxuriously and richly when she did not have even 1 kopeck with her. But when the man was not expecting any resistance from the woman, who was probably scared, he noticed that Karen suddenly raised her head and looked at him, called him by the name Hans, and asked him if he guessed how long it took to do her hair like hers. The man looked at the girl and was even scared, because she had named his real name, even though she was seeing her for the first time and had not even told her his name. So he hesitantly asked the lady where she had learned his name. But in response, the lady only slowly rose to her feet and continued to speak, saying that even if he stole all her jewelry, his wife would not stop despising him. And the lady knew all this for the reason that she was 100% familiar with the plot. She even smiled as if she would now be completely unafraid of the criminal in front of her, boldly threatening him with information about the future. Or rather, telling him that even if he beats her, he will be shot, because she is no longer afraid of her life. Hearing this, the brunette immediately extended the hoop in his hand to his partner and ordered him to shut up, even when the red-haired partner warned him, saying that perhaps the lady in front of them was insane, but this did not stop him. And when the brunette ordered his friend to shut the main character's mouth, the fair-haired man hastened to hit the lady on the cheek with all his strength, as if only this would make the red-haired lady shut up. But at first she was surprised, but did not give in to panic. In response, she smiled once again at her offenders, calling the offender Thomas and confessing to him with blood around her lips that if he died, his daughter would shamefully go to her mansion to work there as a dishwasher. But as soon as she told him with a smile that his daughter would soon die of a terrible disease, his face instantly turned blue and shock and even greater fear appeared on his face, which was mixed with indignation, a desire to take revenge for the cruel words. And when the girl with purple eyes saw that her words made one of the guys pull out a switchblade from his pocket, she suddenly became more serious and angry, asking herself in her mind if the end would really be the same again. And by the words about the same end, she meant exactly that once again she was saved by Raymond, who appeared literally out of nowhere and saved her from 2 robbers, hugging and pressing her to himself. But at that moment, they looked at each other as if they did not feel anything. And so she ordered the fair-haired guy to quickly kill her and do it as quickly as possible, while the stranger himself was trembling and could not decide to move his hand, forcing the node to slide down the throat of the protagonist, who in fact so wanted to end everything as quickly as possible. The guy's hand was shaking and he still couldn't bring himself to make a sudden movement, causing Karen's neck to bleed, which is why the red-haired lady even yelled at him, telling him not to hesitate, because in fact, Raymond was about to show up here and ruin everything. Already with a wound on her cheek, she looked back and already felt the approach of Rayon, who again wanted to be an unnecessary savior for her, because an angry woman, on the contrary, only wants death. But she never expected something strange to happen, because the lady suddenly felt a sharp pain in her stomach right after she heard the words of an unknown man that someone was standing in his way. And immediately after that, she felt a sharp push. The killer's folding knife quickly became bloody, But the blonde guy's hand was shaking, while Carrick already understood that the most important thing had already happened, and therefore she just needed to wait for the moment when everything would end. He walked away from her and the couple began to quarrel, when one asked the other why she did it, and while the second answered that everything was not as he thought. And while they were quarreling, the lady in the luxurious blue dress gradually curled up from a sharp pain in her stomach. Covering her stomach with her hands because blood was pouring out of it like a river, the red-haired lady whispered that it hurt, but no one heard, which is why she gradually sank into her thoughts, realizing that she would no longer be able to predict anything if Nancy was no longer there, and Donna was not around either. Her face depicted emotions of true pain that she could not bear, and that was what shocked the lady, because over 100 years of life she had become accustomed to all pain, but for some reason it was she who made her suffer and scream about it. And she realized that she was in a very difficult situation, because it was in this state that one of the strangers covered her mouth, telling his friend that now they would have to get rid of this frame so that no one else would know what they had done to the lady of noble birth. And while the red-haired, shocked lady's face was filled with fear and questions about whether she would survive, how quickly she would die, and what? The brunette held her mouth tightly and with sweat on his face told his friend to act faster so that no one would notice them, but they wouldn't even be able to escape from the crime scene. And all because of a bearded guy with a tail who could not decide to put his hands down with a knife and inflict injury on a woman, because fear prevented him from doing so, which ultimately made the decisive choice for him. Because right after the deafening shot rang out, a bullet flew into the guy's head, passing right through, releasing a splatter of blood from his blood, causing the already undead stranger to fall to the ground right in front of the dying lady. And when she felt that the guy behind her was no longer holding her back with his hands, because he had just as instantly died from a bullet wound, Karen was not even surprised or happy, but on the contrary, she was upset, realizing that everything had happened too late and she would not be able to escape from the man she hated. And all because the man with a confident gait, in black shoes and dark trousers, was hurrying towards the lady like a hero, intending to quickly take her in his arms, like in the most romantic films. But the problem is that the heroine least expected his appearance. The girl smiled unnoticed by everyone from the terrible situation, realizing that it was wrong to say such a thing to her rescuer. But even if she had decided, she would have confessed to him that she was not happy about their meeting with all her heart. Because in front of her, for the umpteenth time, a blonde man with green eyes appeared, who looked at her sweetly and asked how she was feeling, already falling in love with her at first sight, which the lady learned thanks to the plot she had learned by heart. She realized that everything was happening exactly the same as 100 years ago, so she didn't even look at the handsome man in front of her and didn't hide her disgust for him, which was visible on her face when she frowned indignantly and didn't respond to the hero of the novel. Having decided to look at him with at least a displeased look, the lady felt disgusted even at the thought that everything was being played out over and over again, even when the seemingly very attractively dressed handsome man with, it seemed, good intentions, knelt down in front of her, asking how she was feeling. Looking at his appearance, which for many may seem almost perfect, starting from the angles of his face and ending with his hair, the girl remembered that a guy named Raymond not only has a gorgeous appearance from birth, but also an interesting backstory. Imagining him with a gun in his hands, surrounded by darkness and with a sharp gaze, the girl thought that he was not a noble knight, although he sought to protect ordinary people from injustice, which seemed to be the work of his life. The thing is, he worked as a sniper, killing people to order, which he did one night in his life, already looking at his target through the sight of a gun, while one arrogant officer spoke harshly to a soldier in uniform and pointed his finger at him, forcing him to bow. Karen remembered all this and thought that working as a sniper did not do Raymond a great honor. But this did not stop the guy, because that night he decided to shoot the man with their gun, because of which the soldier immediately grabbed him, asking the captain what happened and not yet realizing that he would not wake up. He sat in the bushes and already heard the cries of alarmed soldiers that there was a killer somewhere here. But at that time he did not yet understand that a barrage of criticism would fall upon him, saying that only cowards shoot from cover. But this was only the first murder of the main character. However, when behind Raymond with a gun there were more and more corpses, people whom he took the lives of thanks to his own weapon, criticism towards him became less and less, because bad personalities for many died, which was to some extent fair. Then, when he realized that there was only emptiness around him, Raymond realized that he had already killed 300 people with his own hands, which made him wonder whether he was now standing on the bones of the dead and whether he was holding on to the top thanks to them, or whether he was worthy of carrying out justice with such radical methods. Although there was emptiness and thoughtfulness in his eyes, he himself missed the moment when he became a national hero for society, a respected person among others, who is capable, despite everything, of bringing justice where it seems impossible. So when he looked at the shiny, golden, larger caliber cartridge in his hands with his green eyes, he knew that he now had the nickname Golden Devil, gradually becoming more and more famous with this nickname. He was in a camp of some raffled tents that his team had pitched in a dark forest, and he was sitting near a fire when a man approached him. And the guy himself was thinking about the rumors that had already started about him, that he had sold his soul to the devil for excellent accuracy, which helps him always hit the target. Raymond himself also did not notice how everyone began to treat him not with contempt, but with respect, because even the soldiers passing by looked at him with blushes on their faces, smiles, and embarrassment. And even the gray-haired man who was always next to Raymond, because he was his subordinate, sometimes smiled, watching the reaction of unfamiliar guys who did not even know Raymond by sight, but already respected him. After that, he handed his master a plate of dried meat, telling him that although it was simple food, he might like it. But the blonde simply took the dish with the plate in his hand, thanking his partner for his concern. A guy with golden hair, which only played beautifully in the light of the fire, slowly developed in the wind and swayed, while he himself slowly chewed dried meat, doing it in complete silence, which did not at all indicate that he was cruel. But suddenly, the blonde looked at Zenon and told him that tomorrow by 2 o'clock in the afternoon he had to be at the destination. This made the man take the gun in his hands and think about why he said this, because Raymond always goes on missions alone. The blonde never answered his gray-haired friend, but simply offered his colleague to take the wounded soldier, while Zeno himself thought about how his master always took care of his servants and comrades, not considering them those who should serve him unquestioningly. And now, when it was already dark outside and the stars were visible in the sky, the blonde man carried the wounded Karen in his arms, who was thinking and wondering why he was the one who was destined to meet her. He was always followed by his faithful servant named Zeno, who this time found himself next to the carriage when the hero, with the red-haired lady in his arms, ordered him to carry water and bandages to dress the wounds, which Zeno hastened to do first. And the blonde calmly sat down with the main character in his own carriage, intending to do only a good deed because he was already waiting for the moment when the servant would bring him bandages and other supplies to help the lady. However, when Zeno ran away from the carriage to bring his master what he ordered as quickly as possible, she wondered why the guy decided to help the lady if he usually doesn't even wander the streets of the city. And when Zeno looked closely at Raymond, he clearly noticed that there was a sly and insidious smile on his face, albeit unnoticeable to everyone else, which is why he assumed that he himself had wounded Karen for his own purposes. Sometime after everyone had sat down in the carriage, with Karen lying on Mr. Raymond's lap, and the butler and Donna also in the transport, everyone was heading home, as they had already been in the city for too long. The butler silently glanced at the suspicious Raymond, while Donna, with a blush on her face, could not tear her eyes away from him, saying that she had already treated Karen's wounds. But now she had a couple of questions for the guy himself. The lady with green eyes dared to ask the blonde what he was doing on the territory of Lord Hare, that is, the father of the main character, which the main character also asked him, as if irritated by his presence. But the guy only answered with a sly smile. He said that it was his personal business, which made the red-haired lady on his lap even more angry, realizing that the guy next to her increasingly seemed to her not a simple hero, but a cunning charmer. However, when the guy admitted that he was also here for the reason that his fiancée was also here, Donna suddenly blushed, asking who he meant, and the butler Bowen only became even more angry. But when he told everyone loudly and clearly that his bride was Lady Isila Evans, everyone suddenly fell silent and admired nothing anymore, which was evident from Donna's painted face and Bowen's angry expression. This only made the main character smile and sigh as if she was now mocking Raymond's behavior and manner of speech, forgetting that her wound had not yet completely healed and needed to be taken care of. But when the carriage suddenly jumped on the move because of a large rock, Karen moved and grabbed her stomach, growling in pain, which caused Donna to approach her and ask about her well-being. And Raymond carefully covered her wound with his hand. With his green eyes, in which there seemed to be nothing but severity, the blonde looked at the girl and told her that her strong corset had taken the entire blow, which is why the wound was not so deep, and everything was more or less fine. Hearing this, Donna was so indignant that she looked at him with anger and silence, as if she did not understand how he could tell her such a thing when the lady was still uncomfortable and she would have to wait for a full recovery. Then he decided to scratch his golden hair, look at the floor thoughtfully, and tell Donna that if she didn't believe him, they could try to take off the corset and look at the wound. But if no one trusted him. Hearing this, the red-haired lady looked at him puzzled and said playfully that she saw that he was not at all slow in his desire to undress her as soon as possible, to which the slightly embarrassed guy replied that he meant something completely different. This surprised and outraged Donna even more, who jumped up in the carriage and raised her hands up, angrily looking at the blonde and telling him that this was real shamelessness. But she was interrupted by Karen herself, who explained that it was a joke and they were almost there. Suddenly, the carriage hit a rock again, causing it to shake violently and sway from side to side, causing the lady to grab her stomach wound again and close her eyes, clenching her teeth, trying to endure the pain. The butler was the first to be outraged by this, shouting at the blonde and telling him that he couldn't allow himself to behave so calmly when there was a lady in serious condition next to him, to which Raymond responded calmly, saying that her life was not in danger and that there was no problem. Karen was also outraged by the guy's words, still holding her stomach with her hands and smilingly asking the guy if she thought that her wound was just a scratch in his opinion, which was not even serious. Now the guy was trying more to joke or tell his opinion and to apologize, explaining that he didn't want to seem rude or respond with anger, because in fact he just wanted to tell her that the wound wasn't fatal and she could recover. In response, the red-haired lady only turned away from him with furrowed brows and replied that she didn't mean to be sarcastic and therefore apologized for her words, also warning everyone that it seemed she was about to lose consciousness. Only then did everyone in the carriage fall silent, allowing the main character to enjoy the silence, and Donna sat down on her knees in front of her because she is trying to help Karen more than anyone else and is worried about her as if she were a dear friend. She even began to cry right in front of the lying Karen and blush, looking at how difficult it was for the mistress to experience pain, which made the perplexed protagonist wonder why her servant was shedding tears over trifles. But when she looked at the face of the blonde Raymond, who sat quietly in the carriage and did not move, she saw a completely different picture, because he simply looked at her without any emotions of pity or worry. He asked her with the same indifference about her health, as if he did it not out of empathy, but out of politeness, which is why the red-haired lady was surprised to hear only such calm words about her health when she couldn't even get up normally. The discouraged lady looked at the blonde man in amazement and admitted to him that if she was bleeding now and could not cope with the pain, then everything was fine, which is why Raymond apologized again, closing his eyes in slight shame. When the guy plaintively explained that he didn't know how to take care of people and support them, the red-haired lady only sighed in irritation and realized that Raymond was just another victim of the plot, and he didn't deserve her anger. And when the guy had already decided to calmly admit to her that he hadn't been out anywhere for 10 years, a current seemed to run through the protagonist's skin, and she suddenly realized that she was dealing with someone who really didn't understand a lot of things. She decided to put her head on his lap, rather to say that she had a lot of fun with him, which surprised the blonde and even asked the girl what she meant. But the lady never answered him. The lady decided to just look away and think about something of her own, because it seemed that conversations with people who were not interesting to her no longer brought her pleasure, especially since the blonde seemed completely empty to her. In her head, she remembered the Elan, big and beautiful, realizing that for the first time she saw such an amazing animal, which, instead of obediently showing tricks, decided to rebel and try to gain freedom. Remembering also how demonstratively and majestically he raised his trunk, the girl understood that she herself could not believe that somewhere on Earth such beautiful and amazing creatures, striking in their grace, walked. This is exactly what the girl told everyone in the carriage. Or rather, the smile never left her face when she told everyone that she had seen an incredible spectacle today, not even the elephant itself, but the graceful tricks of acrobats and other performers, which made the lady even feel happier. And then the blonde smiled just as sweetly, closed his eyes and confessed to the heroine that he was now happy for her, and he also confessed that he also liked the elephant, even though he had to shoot it after the show. However, Donna still couldn't calm down, because tears were still streaming from her eyes. She blushed and looked at the floor in embarrassment, telling Karen that if she had never seen an elephant before, then it was all her fault. She couldn't stand it and burst into tears, confessing to the girl that it all happened only because of her, and that it was she who suggested that the lady go to the circus. But Karen, lying on the couch, calmly told Donna to be quieter, saying that everything was not so. Karen looked at her calmly when Donna told her that she didn't even know what would have happened next if Sir Raymond hadn't come to her and saved her from the robbers. But the mere mention of the guy who was annoying her slightly irritated the heroine. But when the crying blonde lady in front of her with hope in her tearful eyes said that this was fate, Karen suddenly realized that there was nothing around her. And just one word from the maid made her remember all her lives. Then the lady looked at Raymond's gray-haired personal servant named Zenon, and remembered that the characters followed the script, perceiving the development of the plot as something natural. But now everything was completely different. And when she also glanced at her personal butler named Bowen, she guessed that they probably perceived everything that was happening as completely correct, a fate that was predetermined for everyone. But the protagonist did not agree with this. The sad girl lowered her head and in the darkness suddenly realized that only one word, or rather fate, made her doubt that she had all the best in herself. Therefore, looking down, she realized that she wanted to take revenge even for her pain. Karen realized that she would no longer tolerate the abuse from an unfair fate, and with a sharp movement, she forced her hand in a black glove to jump away from Donna's palms when she held them, as if supporting them. Addressing her by name, the protagonist grabbed the girl's head with her hand, thus forcing her to come closer to her as if to ask a sharp question. Coming as close to her as she could, the red-haired lady smiled, looking at Donna and asking her if she thought that fate was being rather cruel to her in that case, because today she had almost died twice, and that alone had scared Donna incredibly. She even raised her violet eyes to Sir Raymond, who had been watching the lady's actions all this time, and asked him if she was right in her judgments, asking it too insistently and angrily. At first he answered the main character, "That's right," looking down and saying it with uncertainty. But after that he said, everything is not so, and he has one thing but regarding this issue. Then he looked at the red-haired lady with his green eyes and honestly, with severity, said that despite all the most terrible things that were happening to her, it did not even frighten Lady Hare, which is why he considered her very suspicious. The next day, when the main character along with the others successfully reached home, one of the main characters in the story was in the Palace of Caire, in her room, where there were dresses scattered all over the bed on the back of the bed. And it was Isila who was to blame for the disorder in the room, because every dress that she did not like even a little bit, she threw away and threw on the floor, ordering the servant to bring a new one, because they were not too smart or not too pretty. The maid was still next to her and showed her a variety of dresses, asking the heroine if she liked it, which made Isila even more indignant, saying that it was incredibly simple and therefore did not suit her. She indignantly told the servant that simple people like her had absolutely no taste in clothes, which caused the servant to sadly lower his head and apologize to the mistress, feeling indignation inside himself. But suddenly, Isila's choice of dresses was interrupted by her father, who decided to demonstratively knock on the door and look at his daughter, telling her not to be so arrogant and to choose what was offered. However, as soon as Dad appeared, Isila immediately decided to pounce on him with hugs and tears, which is why he asked what was wrong, to which the girl answered him with sadness, saying that her beloved Sir Raymond saved Karen the other day. The blonde did not understand his daughter's worries and therefore looked at her with contempt, saying that on the contrary, it was good, because he, as a person known to everyone, taught the knights an example of how to act in special situations. But this did not calm Isila down one bit, who still hugged the couple and told him that it seemed that Raymond had fallen in love with Karen more than with her, because she was already sure that Mrs. Hare was several times more beautiful than her. The lady dared to turn to one of the servants with an indignant expression on her face and confessed to her father that she was already sure that everyone in this house was waiting for this to happen. But the servant frowned, not giving any sign that she was eavesdropping on their conversation. Hearing this, Isila's dad decided to laugh, saying that if you think about it according to her logic, then Sir Raymond can fall in love with any girl he meets and arrange a harem for himself. But Isila was only more indignant at her dad's words. Then he decided to address his daughter more seriously, which is why he put his hand on her shoulder and addressed her by name, saying that for aristocrats like them, marriage is a tool for ruling and not a sign of legitimate love, as in fairy tales about happy love. And Isila fell silent when her father began to tell her that love did not play any role for them here, and therefore she should not dwell on it so much, because her feelings would most likely remain something special in her soul. Looking up, Sir Verdict sighed, as if with mockery and a smile, asking his daughter why her fiancé would cancel the wedding in favor of a less noble family, meaning them, because their family is not so influential. Although rich and aristocratic, the blue-eyed lady looked at him with sadness and devastation in her soul, silent when Dad tried to convince her that such a scenario was very difficult to imagine, because Raymond was not the kind of person who would choose her when he could marry a more influential and aristocratic lady, like a hero of the people. And she got angry at her own father, looking at him with malice, because when she tries to tell him about her feelings, but he begins to explain to her all the subtleties of the aristocracy, and that those around her seem to want only benefits, like him, although no one is sure of that. Isila's father seemed to have read her thoughts because he suddenly made her raise her chin, because he grabbed her face with his hand, which surprised and frightened the always dissatisfied and arrogant girl, who already felt that her father wanted to tell her something. He leaned towards her as close as possible and spoke sternly, saying that since her arrival here, she had been behaving too naively and nervously, which frightened the lady more than anything else. But she still looked at him with painted eyes. Verdict even looked at the servants and asked his daughter demonstratively whether she was being treated badly here, if she had become nervous lately. And his look only made the maid more upset, as if all of Isila's worries were only her fault, but everything was far from simple. Then Isila decided not to remain silent, but to start by grabbing her dad's wrist with such a trembling in her hands that anyone could easily understand that she was very worried and anxious about something. But this only meant that she didn't want to confess something terrible to her dad. She closed her eyes at the moment when her father had already lowered her hand, and the blonde, with fear and some shame, told her father that she had recently had a nightmare that she remembered for the rest of her life, because even now it sent chills and goosebumps through her body. Namely, she decided to tell Dad about that very vision, very realistic and scary, confessing that she saw in her room the corpse of Nancy, the same maid who serves Mrs. Karen Hare. Hearing this, Isila's father, for some reason, did not fall into horror, and most importantly, was not even surprised, but was slightly puzzled, looking at her and asking her if that same maid really existed in reality, which did not calm her down, but only alarmed the blonde even more. Being calm, he decided to calm his daughter down too. So Verdict put his hand on his daughter's shoulder and made her sit on the blue sofa, asking her why she didn't call that same maid to be finally sure that she was alive or not. But Isila did not even raise her head to him, as if from incredible fear and embarrassment, she was not ready to open up. So with her head down, she told him that the maid immediately after the vision disappeared somewhere, or rather, 2 days after they arrived at this terrible house. Hearing this, Verdict was surprised and now became wary, also sitting down next to his daughter on the divan and answering her that quite a lot of time had passed since their arrival. And also he did not finish his sentence, as if his thoughts were louder and he did not know what to say. And Dad continued to be near his daughter, who, it seemed, did not calm down, but only became more worried, trying to sit closer to her father and tell him what for her was a real nightmare in reality. Her face showed genuine horror and confusion, because she confessed to her dad that she had not seen Nancy since she had seen her corpse, which terrified her so much that she could not live peacefully in this seemingly ordinary mansion. And while Isila was worried even more and confessed her fears to her dad, the main character was in a bright room, into which the morning light penetrated, which decorated a variety of snacks with dishes and cookies with muffins. And the red-haired lady stood in the middle of the room doing nothing, while the head maid with a neat hairdo put a corset on her waist and told her that it was not worth changing maids as often as gloves, to which Karen agreed. Sighing, the lady with the monocle looked at the protagonist's back and told her that despite all this, she should seriously think about who would become her personal maid after Nancy, if she was no longer there. And it was the head maid named Helen who told her this. Helen also told the protagonist that Donna was not yet ready to be near a noble lady, as her personal maid and the girl behind Helen was indeed unsure, looking at the floor. But Karen still asked, didn't Emiya and Donna serve her well? The beautiful lady with ruby hair smiled and looked at everyone as if with a joke, and said that it was thanks to Donna that she managed to meet Sir Raymond, like this is now a real achievement. Hearing this, Helen continued to pull the corset tighter and turned away from Karen indignantly, saying that everything was completely wrong. But in response, the protagonist only said with a smile that today she would even have dinner with him. With a sneer, the red-haired lady admitted that Donna had helped her meet her fate, which caused Helen to immediately look at Donna indignantly and ask if that was true, while the fair-haired maid herself fell to her knees and said that it was not so. Only after that, as if she had played enough with everyone, Karen smiled, closing her eyes and thinking about the fact that now even the servants knew about this. And although she was engaged to Dulan, there was nothing between them from the very beginning. Remembering the ever-disgruntled face of the black-haired Dulan in his official clothes, The lady recalled that according to the plot, when his father died, he would receive a large inheritance, and it was for this reason that the lady had married him. And remembering also the blonde man with green eyes who seemed to even glow with his kindness and mercy, the girl realized that this is how everyone sees him, because they hope that Madame will find herself a better groom in the role of Raymond. And also in her mind flashed the memory of how in the carriage Raymond looked at the girl and told her that it didn't seem like all the misadventures didn't surprise her at all. Karen thought that there was nothing surprising in the fact that she could look at Raymond as a groom, but everything was completely different from the plot. But in an impulse to remember everything that happened in the past, the red-haired lady was surprised at first not to notice how Donna, feeling guilty for allowing the lady to meet with Raymond, knelt down in front of the heroine and began to ask for forgiveness, which made Helen grab her head in anger. The ruby-haired lady smiled as sweetly as ever, telling Donna that it was all her fault, and also telling Helen that she would not be blamed for anything, an ordinary maid who was only doing her job. But in response, Helen only raised her eyebrows and told Karen that there was no point in trying to cover for her, because Donna would be punished as she deserved anyway for trying to introduce a lady to Raymond on purpose. The red-haired lady just looked at her coldly and angrily, as if she didn't even want to listen to her anymore, because she thought that Helen was treating her like a daughter, taking on the role of a strict mother, which she really didn't like. However, as soon as she remembered how she often sat at her desk and held papers and a pen in her hands, tiredly reading the text, she realized that she was at least grateful that Helen was in charge of the entire household, and she didn't have to bother with it. But now, when she looks at the fair-haired lady with green eyes, a sweet appearance and character, she realizes that she still wants to keep Donna close, even if Eden is categorically against it. That's why she now decided to put her hand on the strict Helen's forearm and confess to her that she wanted to change her maid and make Donna her personal servant, because she had already become very attached to her. And also the lady, grabbing the head maid by the hand, the red-haired lay asked Helen if she could keep her company in case Donna couldn't be with her. The woman replied that she was too busy for that. But in response, Karen only said that, as she could see, there was no one to take care of her. Deciding to arouse her pity, the red-haired lady looked at her with her purple, sweet eyes and sadly said that she would be incredibly lonely without Donna, which is why she asked her to make Donna her personal maid. And then Donna fell silent, looked at the protagonist, and eventually realized that she could not refuse her, especially if the lady was asking her for it so persistently. She ended up angrily asking Karen not to use her cuteness for her own purposes anymore. But the red-haired lady was still happy, realizing that the head maid would allow her to make Donna her personal maid, which is why she said that she would not do it anymore. After this, when the lady turned away from Helen, who said goodbye and said that she didn't understand what was going on in her beautiful and charming-looking head, the protagonist only smiled slyly, realizing that she had achieved her goal. When the heroine wanted to smile from the understanding that with the always kind smile of persistence she gets what she wants, Helen suddenly confessed to the red-haired lady that after Nancy's disappearance, except for Donna, she still had no one to serve, which is why the lady clarified what was wrong with Nancy. Helen was even more surprised when she asked the lady how she had not heard all the news first, because she thought that Nancy had told her all the most important things first. But now, realizing that the maid had not done this, she calls her ill-mannered. And when a disgruntled Karen turned to her and asked her again what had happened to Nancy, Helen huffed, telling her briefly that Nancy was leaving because she couldn't stand it anymore. Also grabbing the red-haired main character by the shoulders, Helen admitted that, according to Nancy, she not only can't be here anymore, because here she sees people in whom you can't be 100% sure. This made the protagonist clench her fist, thinking that it simply couldn't be possible that Nancy had simply left the mansion, and that's why she didn't believe a single word the head maid said. With her glowing purple eyes, she looked at the floor and thought that she had definitely killed her, and she was even as sure of it as possible. Which is why she was now asking herself if the plot had really gotten so twisted that even she herself didn't understand anything. Her face showed anxiety, mixed with anger and hatred, irritation that everything was not going according to plan, because the lady was also trying to understand if there were hidden actions of an unknown person who might have gotten rid of her corpse in secret from everyone. After some time, Natal had that same joint dinner of the families in one of the rooms, thanks to which Raymond, Karen, Dulan with Verdict, and Isila were sitting at a long table and having dinner. And also at the table was an unknown aristocrat. He looked at Raymond with his sly smile and monocle on his face and thanked him for the help he had provided, thanks to which Karen had not died and had even remained safe after being attacked by 2 unknown robbers. In response, the blonde just closed his eyes, continued cutting food with a knife and holding a fork in his other hand, telling everyone that he should have come to the rescue earlier, because in that case, Karen would definitely not have suffered. The main character also expressed her gratitude, smiling feignedly at the knight and telling him that he was a real hero, although in reality he was boredly thinking about how everything was happening as before, dull and monotonous. In her head, she still remembered how he looked at her in the carriage with his angry eyes. It seemed like he guessed something, but now the lady hurried to calm herself down, thinking that most likely he was overexcited at that moment, and in fact Raymond had not changed. The red-haired lady seemed to be cutting a dish on a plate with a knife, and it seemed that nothing was bothering her. But she was thinking hard about the fact that it seemed that the whole situation with Nancy had thrown her off track, and that was why she began to see things that didn't really exist. And Karen realized that Isila had changed a lot too, because the blonde suddenly turned to Raymond and asked if he didn't find it contradictory that the best wine was made in monasteries, since in fact wine was not spiritual. In response, the golden-haired Raymond told Isila that the priest was the one who knew the most about this matter, and so he looked at Dulan, who was sitting next to him, who immediately became surprised, asking everyone if they were talking about him now. And Dulan was in no hurry to answer the guests' questions directly because of the embarrassment that he felt. And he looked away, even though he was holding a glass of wine in his hands and saying that he needed to think. Although in fact he was not just embarrassed by the large company of people. And his words were interrupted by a man with a monocle who was also sitting at the table and coughed into his hand, telling everyone that the inability to control oneself is a sin. But a taste for good wine is not such a serious crime as everyone thinks. He even turned to the murderous Lady Evans, who held a glass in her hand and looked at them with her mouth open, when the gentleman asked her whether she considered everything that they did every day to be unspiritual, if she also called wine sinful. Everyone looked attentively at the beautiful dishes on the table, the perfectly roasted steaks with magnificent sauces, the glasses of red wine, when the gentleman asked everyone why they did not consider it a sin to eat so richly, and whether it was necessary to distinguish between these concepts. He looked at Isila and asked her with complete seriousness, as if she had said in her own words that there was too much food on the table. And he also asked her where one could find the line between wealth and poverty in the world. And her father began to smile slyly when the blonde decided to lean back in her chair with a glass of wine, and with her chin raised high, answer everyone that, in her opinion, the measure that can be relied upon is the way of life of ordinary people. She also looked at everyone and with complete confidence said that thanks to her studies of the particular network of the place where she now resides, she came to the conclusion that these lands need systematic changes. All the guests and hosts of the house were sitting at a long table and listening to the conversation, when the gentleman with the monocle asked Isila whether her statements had any valid grounds, to which the blonde answered that of course they did. And the red-haired lady listened to their conversations, simultaneously putting pieces of the dish into her mouth with the thought that it seemed that Isila also did not want to sit still if she herself started a conversation on rather adult topics. Looking attentively at how Isila, smiling, told everyone how she had recently conducted a study, looking at a stack of documents with the necessary information, Karen already understood that the blonde had a mission to show everyone that she was worthy of being the mistress of these lands. But the heroine mostly didn't care how and what Isila was trying to achieve, because she didn't surprise her at all. So she sometimes glanced at Raymond and wondered with a glass in her hand whether the blonde would like her activities. She was looking at him at the moment when Raymond was calmly eating pieces of food on a fork with his eyes closed and simply listening to Isila's words. But Karen understands perfectly well that such an honest person like him loves dignity, and not to come in with money, which is what the blonde is aiming for. She also looked at Isila's father, who, sipping red wine from a transparent glass, glanced at his daughter when the protagonist remembered that, unlike everyone else, Verdict had neither honor nor the dignity that every self-respecting aristocrat usually has. After listening to Isila's monologue about how she was aiming to develop these lands under her control, the gentleman with the monocle clapped his hands and told Verdict that his daughter would definitely make them all nervous, to which the blonde's father responded with a smile, perceiving the aristocrat's words as a joke. Hearing that her dad began to shower her with compliments about how his youngest daughter was incredibly erudite and inquisitive, the blonde proudly raised her chin up, showing everyone that she was the most worthy person at the table. That's why the red-haired llama looked at her with incomprehension and rejection, as if with hostility, asking herself whether she was being praised too much, also holding a glass of wine near her face as if everything was actually fine, and she was just listening to everyone. but suddenly she decided to put the glass of alcohol on the table with a loud bang, looking at Isila with a smile and confessing to her that she didn't know that she valued moderation so much, although in fact she was playing along and deliberately feigning politeness. In response, the blonde began to smile in exactly the same way and put her elbow on the table, looking at her interlocutor with exactly the same fake grin on her face and telling her that culture should come from the very top, meaning herself. And then she even decided to tell everyone out loud that she didn't think that her dresses and jewelry were in excess, or rather, something that was unnecessary. And she looked at Raymond with a smile and asked his opinion on this matter, as if she wanted to hear his voice in the conversation. And Raymond, realizing that now everyone, and especially Madame Isila, would demand an honest answer from him, slowly raised his hand to wipe his mouth with a white handkerchief. But he was also already beginning to tell that his brother had taught him one important thing in his life. And when Raymond finished his sentence by saying that it was his brother who taught him never to interfere in women's affairs, Isila smiled even wider and sweeter, as if showing the blonde all her beauty, and she already wanted to tell him her opinion on this matter. But Raymond did not let her begin. The thing is that the blonde lowered his hand with the handkerchief and looked angrily at everyone, telling Isila with severity that when she becomes his wife, he, of course, will have to interfere in her seemingly feminine affairs. Then Isila fell silent, looking at Raymond no longer with such delight and admiration, but with apprehension, as if a chill ran down her spine and she seemed to understand that Raymond was not just a knight with golden hair, but a strict person towards everything, even towards her. She never said anything against it, which is why Raymond simply began to drink wine from a glass with incredible calm, when the blonde sometimes glanced at him and was already afraid to express her achievements, or at least brag about them. And not only she fell silent, but also the gentleman with the monocle and her father, who began to be awkwardly silent and occasionally cough, trying to dilute the awkward silence with at least some sounds. Otherwise, the previously lively communication would turn into a simple, silent dinner. Also, the most embarrassed of all seemed to be the already shy groom of the main character named Dulan, who looked at his plate and was silent, pretending that he had not heard anything special, while the red-haired Karen sat next to him and did not seem surprised by anything. And it was she who decided to break the silence first, looking at Isila and putting her hand on her cleavage with a smile, telling everyone with cunning that she was still happy about everything, because she was sure that Isila had started talking about excess only because the table with dishes turned out to be wonderful. And Isila still couldn't say a word because she was looking at them with a blush on her face from shame, while the protagonist managed to say that she was glad that she liked the dishes on the table so much that she decided to talk about something unnecessary. Sometime later, waiters arrived in the hero's room with new dishes, and each of them hurried to serve the aristocrats their own plates with what was probably an incredibly rich dinner. And as soon as the servants lifted the cloche, everyone saw on their own plates an exquisite salad, the main decoration of which was a small fried chicken the size of a lemon cut in half, which is called ortolan, and is fattened for a month and then aged in expensive cognac. The first to react to such a dish was the blonde Isila, who even blushed from indignation and began to look at the dish with unusual disgust, considering what she was served to be gluttony, as if she was now looking not at a dish but at the most tasteless porridge. And Raymond hurried to look at her with a slight grin and suspicion, who, on the contrary, called the person refined and incredibly unusual, and also looked at the bride precisely because he wanted to dispute her dissatisfaction. The lady with golden hair blushed even more, which is why she was even afraid to look at Raymond, who dared to ask her if her sin in the form of luxurious clothes and dresses and jewelry was not the only one, because it seemed that she was spoiled in food too. And Verdict decided to support his daughter, putting his hand on the shoulder of the already uncertain blonde and telling Sir Raymond that he was too cruel to her because his daughter still does not understand many things and also allows herself many things. In response, the blonde man with golden hair simply closed his eyes and with unapproachable calmness said that he had already understood that Lady Isila was demanding of everything and thoughtful, and that was precisely what he respected in her, intending to speak out less. And the red-haired La began to shake her head from side to side with displeasure, realizing that Isila had miscalculated again, which is why she was now sitting on a chair with despair and sadness, when even her dad could not support her or encourage her, even if he stroked her back. However, it seems that Verdict noticed the strange reaction of the main character, which is why he looked at her as an enemy, also thinking that Mrs. Karen is definitely against Isila and will help say such provocative words in order to hurt her. And then he seemed to decide to teach Karen a lesson for her behavior and suspiciousness, because he began to thoughtfully tell everyone that in fact his daughter had a couple of reasons for concern, which he remembered, and others immediately paid attention to. The first to speak was the gentleman with a monocle, who was holding cutlery in his hands and said that he was not surprised about this, because the daughter of a good businessman can have many reasons to be constantly busy. But Verdict said that he was not talking about this. And Isila herself stopped being so bold in her words because now she sat quietly and was even afraid to say something, because she guessed what her dad wanted to tell everyone. Because now Verdict admitted that one of the maids made a mistake. Verdict looked at everyone and quickly asked if they knew about the maid they were talking about now, as if he now wanted to talk about the strange events in the mansion, not in the position of the main character, who was strange to everyone. The gentleman with the monocle told Verdlick that everyone in the mansion knew the maid in question, looking at everyone with his sly red eyes and holding a fork with an olive to his face. Isila was the first to be surprised by this, looking at the gentleman with a degree of indignation and anger and asking him if this was true, because as she had previously thought, no one even suspected about a certain maid who had disappeared in the most mysterious way. But the man with the monocle himself did not answer more fully and clearly because no one else was looking at him. He simply ate his dish in silence, as if the topic was not for publicity, but something that was customary to remain silent about. And the silence was broken by the main character, who took and presented a glass of red wine to her face and sternly told everyone that her personal servant named Nancy, who they were talking about, had recently quit, which sounded strange. The first to be stunned by this was Isila, who banged her fist on the table and almost stood up from the table in indignation, looking at Karen in shock and asking her how this happened because she had previously been almost sure that she was on vacation. And her words were interrupted by a silent and suspicious gentleman with a monocle, who said that Nancy had come to him saying that she couldn't do this anymore. And at that moment, he was slowly bringing a fork with a small fried chicken to his mouth. Looking at the overly suspicious man with a monocle, who is actually the heroine's father, Karen watched as he chewed his food and enjoyed its taste, while the protagonist thought about who he saw on that fateful day and who he talked to that he was behaving so strangely. Clutching her fork in anger, the red-haired protagonist looked at him with silent, quiet horror and shock, wondering how he could talk to his daughter and hear her voice if she killed her with her own hands. She did not react to the gentleman's words in any way, but simply changed the subject, playing the role of a naive llama who looks at the table with sadness, telling everyone that the incident made her sad. But Karen's father said that there is nothing wrong with silence. And hearing this, the fair-haired Verdict only sighed and told everyone that at least the issue was resolved, and therefore there was nothing more to worry about, as if he completely believed the master's words, although in fact he did not believe anyone present. He gently pushed his daughter from behind and hinted to her not to be so tense anymore, telling everyone that they could calmly enjoy their dinner. But Isila didn't even seem to want to eat anymore, because she seemed to be sitting on pins and needles and was terribly afraid of something. Taking a closer look at the dish, it even smelled and looked perfect, because the chicken has a rich and appetizing color, which, combined with the berries and decorative foliage on the plate, looks expensive and rich. It was at his own dish that Verdict looked, remembering that a dish containing a quail carcass was quite aristocratic and rich. But despite all this, in his estate, he usually ate such 3 times a day, and he decided to try the chicken, which made him frown, realizing that he was trying not just meat, but something delicious, because the potatoes with which it was served melt in your mouth and the meat is soft, with fruity notes and perfectly fried, which is why even the bones break easily. When the aristocrat was enjoying the dish and trying to figure out what the dish was seasoned with, which is why it tastes so great, suddenly one aristocrat approached him, asking what he was thinking about, which surprised Verdict. He laughed, telling everyone that it was so delicious that he began to enjoy its taste, which made Karen's father put his elbows on the table and smile, telling Verdict as a joke, but he says it to praise. Hearing the strange words from the gentleman, Verdict looked at him with suspicion and anger, thinking that while he was holding a fork in his hands and calmly eating a dish, he understood that he did not understand the value of these lands or the excellent taste. He decided to ask the gentleman with the monocle if they could somehow serve her such a dish at the table, which caused the guy with blonde hair to wave his hand and answer that unfortunately, there were no more birds left on the farm for this. Verdict said that in that case, he wanted to personally speak with the chef who prepared the dish, which is why a surprise chef soon appeared in front of him, asking Mr. Evans how he could help. At first, the gentleman with golden hair and a sly grin decided to praise the chef's efforts, and therefore told him that the dish with the little chicken turned out incredibly tasty and unforgettable, to which the chef responded with gratitude, but still did not understand why the gentleman decided to invite him to his place just because of this. The aristocrat looked at the cook with his blue eyes and touched his chin, honestly admitting to him that he had never tried such bright dishes, and he did not recognize the spices in it, which is why he thought that this was the most unusual thing he had ever eaten. And it seems that the cook took the gentleman's words with embarrassment. Lad took the Gauld aside and began to simply stand in front of him with embarrassment, not even going to tell Verdict the method of preparation or the seasonings that he used for his dish. Verdict even took Povil by the hands and asked him if his preparation of the chicken was a secret, which is why he was silent. But it seemed that the gentleman with the monocle next to them wanted to say what the chef was so embarrassed to tell everyone. And then the true creator of the recipe decided to break the silence and admit to everyone that it was he who created the very dish that Verdict liked so much. But he did it with such embarrassment and with his head down, as if he was ashamed of it. And as soon as Verdict heard this, which the others also heard, he turned to Dulan with a stunned face, which the others did too, looking at the priest as if they really did not expect him to have such a talent. And while Verdict was aware that it seemed that Dulan was also helping the cooks with the cooking in the castle, Raymond decided to look at Dulan with a smile and thank him for the excellent dishes, telling him that it was a real honor for him to try such food and from such a person. He also looked at him with interested eyes and asked if he was a man from the Abbey of Avernus, because he had heard that great attention was paid there to health and proper nutrition. Isila also wanted to keep up the conversation, looking at her future groom with a smile and asking him why he didn't tell her about it earlier if he already guessed about such news. But the blonde didn't like it either. Then Raymond angrily explained to the blonde that he had long ago understood from her statements that she did not really like the cooking in this castle. However, unlike her, Verdict, on the contrary, did not agree with her, even if he thanked the cook for dinner. Raymond continued to talk with Dulan. Or rather, the blonde began to ask the priest polite questions. For example, whether the food he prepared had healing properties in addition to its divine taste. To which the minister modestly replied that it did not. Verdict looked at Dulan with cunning and anger, realizing that if his primary goal was profit, then he would benefit from a person like Dulan now, until he was married to the powerful family of Hair. That is, the main character. He wondered how he would first subjugate Dulan, which would be difficult for him. But then he remembered that his disgruntled daughter was sitting next to him and suggested that Dulan could be entrusted with monitoring the nutrition and health of the Evans family members. It seemed that Isila was the most dissatisfied with the fact that Dulan, a person who lived with the principles of proper nutrition and health, began to cook food for them, which is why she displeasedly asked everyone if anyone was sick, which is why they were eating this. But her father immediately ordered her to stop the inappropriate conversation. Karen's father put his fork down on his plate with an ambiguous smile and admitted that Dulan was not feeling well. So he asked Isela not to bother him with her provocative questions, because everyone seemed tired of each other. That's why she stood up from her place and told everyone that they would have to take a short break. And after that, he again invited everyone to the table, to which everyone silently agreed, because no one wanted to sit at a long table with enemies of each other. But Isila was incredibly indignant when her dad turned to Nancy's dad and told him that he was going to go for a smoke break with him, which suddenly made Isila feel uneasy, more and more sad, as if she didn't like anything that happened at the table. And after a while, she was alone in a lonely, quiet room, sitting at a low chair right in front of the mirror and asking herself why she was so mean, because the sadness in her head was growing more and more. Tears were dripping from her eyes one by one, and she didn't even wipe them away, because she was looking angrily at her reflection and wondering who she really was and why she needed all her wealth and intelligence if she didn't know what to do with it now. Sometimes she screamed with incredible rage and anger, first of all towards herself and towards injustice, asking the whole world with screams why they don't pay attention to her, when she invested a huge amount of money in her appearance and even hair, is rich and well-mannered, but all the attention goes to Karen. Looking at her reflection with hatred and the fear that it was all in vain, she screamed and told herself that she had spent a lot of money on cosmetics and dresses with incredible decorations. But only now she realized that the most important thing was missing from her, and a fleeting memory of her own father saying with a sneer and rolled eyes that for the nobility, marriage was just a deal flashed through her mind. But his words brought back to Isila something that had always hurt her heart. She looked down and suddenly fell silent. feeling tears roll down her cheeks as she remembered that in fact her father had never loved her mother, and therefore had told her about the futility of love for a reason. When she was very little and lived in a mansion, he often noticed how his father had a more beautiful woman and younger than her mother, with whom he hugged and kissed, telling her pleasant words about love, and at that age she already understood that that woman was her father's lover. However, her mother was not faithful to her father either, because Isila watched her mother smile at the butler and seduce him, which was all she liked. But none of their parents noticed that Isila was aware of everything, and she had to just watch. Even then, the little girl cried, was left completely alone, holding a book in her hands, and did not understand what could be wrong with dreaming about true love, which in the future her father would call non-existent and false. However, when one of her days she was lying on a carriage and met Raymond, who was riding a horse and was the same child who was telling her something with a determined look, the girl realized that her dream of mutual love could come true. Even then, she looked at him with admiration and love. She understood that she would dream of living a happy life with him, like in fairy tales. But at that moment, her father was also looking at her, who in fact has other plans for her, his own. Even now, when she looked at the attractive Raymond who was drinking wine with her at the same table, she knew that Raymond was not like her, and that was why she fell in love with him, although she still did not receive reciprocity. Then she decided to raise her head as proudly and sternly as a soldier, looking at herself in the mirror and first of all promising herself that Raymond would be her husband, no matter what happened and no matter what she had to do for this. With full confidence that the blonde would get her fiancé, because she was literally sold to the family, he left his room and decided to walk down the hallway, going down the stairs. But suddenly she heard Raymond's voice where the white curtains swayed in the wind. And when she decided to go down to take a closer look at what was happening, the first thing she noticed was Raymond, who was smiling slyly at her on the balcony, and, as it turned out, was not surprised by her appearance, while Isila was amazed by him. But what surprised her even more was that immediately after this, he turned away from her and began to smile at the person standing in front of him, even holding his hand and telling him that he was also a very eligible bachelor, which he said intentionally, as if with the desire to anger her. The lady was incredibly indignant at this, so she hastened to come closer to him and ask how he dared to say such a thing, as if he had actually spoken to her. But as soon as she did this, the whole terrible truth was revealed to her. The thing is that he was talking to the red-haired Karen on the balcony, who, on the contrary, seemed not to be happy about the conversation and therefore answered the guy boringly, saying that she was very happy that he was the groom. But the blonde convinced her to smile and try to somehow support the conversation because she was interesting to him. He laughed sweetly when Kane showed him her exactly the same fake smile and told him that they only met yesterday, and Raymond already wanted to talk to her, which made the blonde laugh politely even more. He looked at her, and with a smile that never left his face, he hastened to say that her statement that they had met for the first time only yesterday was a complete lie. And when he confessed to the heroine that she knew him for sure, Isila, who heard this, was so surprised that she froze in place with such an expression on her face as if she had heard something terrible for herself. In fact, a couple of hours ago, when Isila looked at the faces of those who were in a hurry to leave the table, offering the gentleman with the monocle to smoke together, she did not suspect that at that moment Raymond did not just want to take a break from everyone. The thing is that her most beloved fiancé was not looking at her, but at the red-haired lady, which was what her fiancé Dulan was doing, while at that time Karen simply got up from the table and wanted to walk along the corridors. And the main character walked down the corridor silently, looking at Verdict and the gentleman with the monocle, who was walking ahead of her and talking about cigars, not even noticing Karen behind her, to whom no one had paid much attention until a certain moment. She looked at them with a fake grin and realized that all she had from the real plot were problems that were incredibly difficult for her to solve, even if she forgot about the fact that escaping from familiar events was a real difficulty for her. After some time, the main character found herself in such a beautiful place, where there were night flowers with snow-white buds, which smelled incredibly at night, and added magic to the interior of a simple balcony, where the protagonist decided to be alone with her thoughts. The girl looked at the flowers on the balconies, which she saw thanks to the moonlight, and could not calm down with thoughts about where Nancy was now and where she had gone if her father suddenly said that the maid had recently come to him. Already on the balcony, she remembered how she had squeezed the fabric around Nancy's neck with pleasure and a smile on her face, making her choke. But now she anxiously wonders who came to her father if Nancy is definitely dead. The girl also remembered how she suddenly realized that it seemed that Nancy's entire murder was just her imagination, which is why she looked down in shock. And now she also asks herself how she can trust herself now. After that, memories flashed through her head of how she sat alone on the floor with her head down and could not find the strength in herself. And now she does not understand whether she was going crazy and whether she can distinguish reality from fiction. Taking the purple rose in her hands and examining it, the red-haired lady thought about her problems and that in the end she needed to rely only on facts if she could imagine such plausible visions, or if it was all reality. Because of her doubts, she remembered what Isila said a couple of days ago with anxiety on her face. And the thing is that she did not admit to her that she saw a body in her room, which is why Karen now understands that it seems the girl would not lie. But the girl still broke off the purple petals from the rose, thinking that on the day of the murder, she was sure that she had enough time to kill Nancy, let alone hide her body so that no one, not even Isila, would find it. She also remembered carefully how she saw her own father in front of her, who looked calm and ate with a fork, telling everyone that Nancy had recently quit of her own free will. But now Karen wonders if her father was lying for some purpose. But suddenly her thoughts were interrupted by someone who appeared in front of her so suddenly that the red-haired woman even forgot about everything she had thought about before, jumped up on the spot and looked at Raymond when he asked her what she was thinking about, and the lady had to answer with a smile, saying that she was not thinking about anything special. She was amazed at how the guy she liked smiled and asked her if she wanted to spend time with him. But at that time, Karen only realized even more that if there are nightmares in fantasy, then this guy was a real horror for her. She thought that his love, although captivating, did not lag behind the post itself of clear answers, which was alarming. But at that time, the guy was already pouring light wine into 2 glasses. But Lay answered that she would not drink it, since she was wounded. To this, the fair-haired guy responded with a smile, holding 2 glasses in his hands, saying that in that case he would drink from 2 glasses for 2. But the irritated lady asked in response why he shouldn't drink straight from the bottle. Then he decided to calmly put the glasses of wine on a small table near him, telling the lady with a smile that it seemed she was angry with him, which caused the lady to turn away, asking in response whether, in his opinion, she had any reason to be happy. And the guy didn't answer this, only leaning closer to the protagonist and whispering near her ear that he was sure that they would have fun together. But only because of this, the house became even more angry, not understanding what the already suspicious Raymond wanted to achieve. He even looked at her with a not sincere, charming smile, as if he wanted to get only her attention, telling her that, in fact, ladies went to war in droves just to see him. But this outraged the heroine even more. She decided to show him her feigned surprise, but still allowed the suspicious gentleman to take her hand, while the lady told him in surprise that she couldn't believe that he was so confident in himself that he was telling her this. Her body instinctively leaned back, away from the smiling and suspicious man, who even now smiled at her just like that, when the red-haired llama tried to explain to him that he already had a bride, Isila, and he didn't need to bother her with smirks. It seems that the guy didn't plan to lag behind the main character, because the smile never left his face, and he explained all his courtship and strange behavior by saying that he simply wanted to take care of the wounded girl, although in fact the protagonist understands perfectly well that they cannot be trusted. But behind her in the window, the red-haired woman could already clearly see Isila, flushed with anger, looking at them with such fury and jealousy that it seemed that after the blonde man's words, not even a hair would remain of Karen. She really had been watching them through the window all this time and was burning with anger with the brightest flame, looking at Raymond and not understanding how he dared to behave so provocatively and impudently, despite the fact that he knew perfectly well that the blonde would be his bride in the future. And although the red-haired lady asked the guy to leave her alone as soon as possible, in reality, she wanted Isila to go crazy over this incident, doing all this out of spite and looking at Raymond, who at that time was looking at her hand and saying that he was only asking to be with her for at least 1 second. But suddenly he raised his eyes to her and honestly admitted that her face looked very sour and dissatisfied. But this did not make the heroine softer, only looking at the blonde and thinking that it was precisely because of his presence. In order, apparently, to smooth the conversation and talk about at least something, the blonde straightened up again and decided to tell the heroine with a proud smile on his face that he was, in fact, an enviable groom, whom all the girls in the area were. But that did not surprise the red-haired lady. Rather, it angered her. She just sighed, telling the guy with her eyes closed that she was very happy that he could share such news with her, to which Raymond responded with surprise, even asking if that was true, believing that the lady was interested in hearing her own praise for herself. After that, he suddenly extended the main character's hand closer to himself, with suspicious statements about the fact that the Evans family, that is, Isila, really wants to get him for themselves. So they are now asking the lady if this is not a great way to get revenge. And after the guy calmly looked Karen in the eyes, bringing her face as close to his as possible, he said that it seemed to him that she wanted to take him away from Isila. But this only surprised the red-haired lady even more. In front of her was a tall guy with a pumped-up body, but Madame was amazed only by his words, asking how this was possible and what he was talking about if they had only seen each other yesterday. But Raymond said again that this was not so and she was lying. The guy continued to smile slyly and tell the lady that she knew him very well and that this was not their first meeting, which is why the protagonist's excitement grew more and more, and the strange, unclear words of the self-confident guy frightened her. Even her hand was shaking, and she didn't want to hold the guy's hand, but he didn't allow her to remove her palm, which is why the lady could only ask him what he meant, and in fact it couldn't be. Because according to the plot, this is their first meeting, and at first she knows him as a national hero, which she told him. Closing her eyes, the red-haired llama remembered asking him about something a couple of times in her past lives. But now the guy in front of her was smiling and claiming that the lady knew him as more than just a hero, which sounded even more suspicious. And she, realizing that it couldn't be that Raymond remembered her in past lives, decided to pretend to talk to him about romance, raising her head to him and asking if he thought she was seducing him, while also trying to talk about something else. Madame continued to think that he didn't remember her and to convince herself of this. But the guy with golden hair in front of her only looked away and began his conversation by saying that he remembered that yesterday Karen called him by name. He's referring to the exact moment when the lady was stabbed in the stomach in a dark alley, causing her to fall to the ground and start screaming his name in panic for Raymond to save her. Because now the guy says he's sure the idea of taking him away from Isila had crossed her mind. And after that, the woman with ruby hair lowered her head so that the blonde man could not see her emotions and sighed as if she was tired or thinking about something. But in fact, she was buying herself time to think about what to do next. In fact, her eyes darkened in the darkness and she herself began to smile slyly, thinking about the fact that she had encountered such situations before, and therefore this was not surprising to her, because it seemed that she already knew what to do to get out of it. Because of this, she decided to raise her head, portraying sadness and regret on her face and feigningly telling the blonde that, of course, the thought had occurred to her to win him back from Isila. But now she realized that the blonde also loved him very much. She even pretended to tell him that he was so famous that she couldn't pass by him. But when she looked at the view from the balcony, she clearly felt Raymond's strange gaze on her, as if he suspected something. He decided to immediately take steps towards her and say that he noticed her immediately despite everything. But the lady with the long train of her dress walked away from him at the same speed, saying in response that he, therefore, had excellent eyesight. His green eyes looked only at the main character, and it seemed that the guy did not talk about Karen at all, although he wanted to be near her, because now he said with a smile that everyone admired him, as if this was the most important thing that the protagonist should know about him. His hand again reached out to the frightened lady with the intention of touching her, while he himself continued to speak. But everyone admires him, but not she, as if she had known him for a long time, which is what attracts him to her in earnest. And his eyes lit up like a hungry, bloodthirsty snake when he turned from a sweet and charming guy into a formidable and scary soldier, who told Karen that her face did not depict a drop of adoration when he was in front of her, which drove him crazy. Karen was so shocked that she looked at him with shocked eyes and an open mouth when his hand touched the protagonist's cheek, and in her violet eyes, the hope that she wanted to see in front of her that very Raymond, a heroine for everyone, and not a two-faced person, seemed to fade. And when the girl was about to cry, a confused and angry priest named Dulan suddenly appeared between them, and he squeezed Raymond's shoulder and angrily asked him what he was doing with his bride. And he was only surprised by his appearance, but not at all afraid. He didn't say a word to him any further, realizing that he was behaving in the most strange way for Dulan and the main character. Because of that, he only looked at the brunette with his bright eyes and remained silent, realizing that Dulan would not back down anymore. And only after that his hand demonstratively let go of the protagonist's palm and rose up as if Dulan was to blame for everything. And he closed his eyes and spoke with indignation. But this was extremely rude on the part of the priest. But for Dulan, it no longer had any meaning, because he took Lei with red hair by the hand and led her into the corridor, briefly telling Raymond that they needed to go and not even saying goodbye to him. And Karen was silent as if from shock. The lady decided to turn to Raymond just once, wanting to see his reaction or face as if for the last time, but she only noticed that the blonde was still looking at her with suspicious, menacing eyes. She also saw behind her that after meeting her, Raymond decided to approach Isila, talking to her about something. But even now, the girl finds oddities in his behavior, because in past lives, he always chose her without any hesitation. Karen thought that if she hadn't changed, they would have been together again. But when she was thinking about it and turning to the blonde, she didn't notice how the priest called her name so that she would no longer pay attention to him. And then, when the girl looked ahead with her violet eyes, she suddenly realized that she did not want love or money like everyone around her, but only death, while not forgetting to take revenge on everyone for the suffering in past lives. After some time, the red-haired lady again found herself at the table where the dinner had been held earlier, and she obediently sat down at the table when Dulan helped her sit down, unaware that his bride was thinking that she was pleased to see him nearby, because in that case, it would be easy to kill. However, when a blonde man also appeared at the table, who was clearly not a naive heroine and a kind person, the girl understood that his suspicions would prevent her from doing what she had planned, so she needed to be twice as careful as before. She emptied the glass onto the new dish, which was covered with a cloche for presentation and safety. But Karen looked at it with a certain indifference, because she was not thinking about the food at all, but about her future murders and what she was doing to commit them. As soon as the cloche opened, she seemed to see a dish that was not hers, but Raymond, whom she had killed as food, who did not open his eyes and was decorated with his own blood. And she thought this for the reason that she understood that she could try to kill the main character for a new path in life. And she willingly took the knife in her hands as if intending to cut her favorite victim. But at the same time, she asked herself the question, will the same thing happen this time if she tries to kill Raymond and make him her main victim? However, she imagined the blonde not just dead in his plate, but smiling at her so sincerely and beautifully that the lady wondered whether this guy would fall in love with her this time, or whether everything would turn out to be more interesting. And the next morning, when Verdieu was sitting on the sofa in his uniform and spreading butter on his bread, he asked his daughter why she had called him so early. Since the previous night they had stayed up late at dinner and had only fallen asleep in the middle of the night. However, when he looked at his daughter to understand why she was not answering, he noticed that the blonde was literally shaking from something and could not even raise her head up, because anxiety still had not left her heart. She pounced on her dad and screamed at him, saying that something was wrong with Nancy and that she was having a terrible nightmare. But her father insisted on his own, remaining calm and telling her that she had already been informed earlier that she had simply quit. And in fact, when Verdict looked closely at his daughter, he understood that he didn't care what happened to Nancy and what his daughter felt, because he wanted not to interfere in the personal affairs of Karen's father for the sake of good cooperation and profit, and therefore he wanted to prove to his daughter that there was no need to worry. So he took his daughter's hand in his and tried to calm her down, saying that this was absolutely not something she should be thinking about, because her engagement was coming soon and she had to get enough sleep, and he also ordered her to return to her chambers and not disturb him while he rested. But in response, the blonde only began to wave her hands and tell her dad with indignation, saying that it seemed to her that Nancy could have been killed by one of the servants, or that the Lord himself had destroyed her. And she also said that he could have turned this to their advantage, made a profit out of it. However, as soon as she said anything about that night when she first saw the strange, terrible vision in her room, Verlick hit the table with his fist with such force that Isila jumped back from him, again unable to speak from fear. With a tired look due to his lowered head and tired voice, Verdict sternly told his daughter not to say anything more about this topic. But Isla still looked at him as if she had not expected this from him at all. Telling his daughter through clenched teeth that he had nothing to say to the owner of the house or to object to him in any way, he grabbed Isla by the forearm and gave her an incredibly hard blow, ordering her not to waste any more time on nonsense and to concentrate on business. And when the frightened and silent Isela looked at her dad, Verdict once again told her with all his anger that they had no right to even present anything to the lord of this estate, because any negativity from their side could have a bad effect on their careers and desire to get these lands. Only after Verdict had maliciously told her daughter that even if the lord himself had killed that maid, they should not care. Isila had finished and the lord had calmed down, raising himself and calmly telling his daughter to prepare for the meeting with Raymond and not to think about something useless. Even when the girl jumped up and shouted to her father that she was just trying to help him get to the swimming pool, He just pointed his hand at her, and loudly with a squeal, said that it seemed like she was only jealous of Karen, and that was why she was behaving so rudely. He turned away from her and seemed to not want to accept her point of view, telling his daughter that she was obliged to marry Raymond and the engagement would definitely take place, and its failure would threaten everyone with a big scandal, which, according to verdict, no one needed. And the girl had to just lower her eyes and quietly agree with her dad, because she realized that he wouldn't even want to listen to her opinion, and that he was only interested in the engagement and business development using his daughter's marriage. He even turned to her and said that she shouldn't jump above her head, hinting that she didn't understand anything about adult affairs and therefore didn't need to speak out. She should just do what her parents, or rather her father, said. Verdict closed his eyes and sighed wearily, explaining to his daughter that one should demonstrate knowledge when necessary. But excessive erudition are harmful, especially in his words, to such a young beauty as she. And then the heroine looked at him with complete shock, from which she could even lose the power of speech. But still words burst out of her mouth, and she asked her dad if he didn't like the fact that she was an educated girl with her own point of view. Right after that, she turned around and wanted to quickly run out of the room away from her dad, while he extended his hand to her and wanted to stop her, shouting, but he didn't mean that at all. But he still couldn't stop the blonde, because Isila ran out of the room so quickly that he wouldn't have been able to catch up with her, which is why he soon saw only the train of her dress even at the moment when he shouted her name, as if he wanted to explain something to her. But for the girl, everything had already become clear. Thus, he was left completely alone, still holding his hand raised because he seemed to be trying to stop the girl. But he continued to be in the room, thinking perfectly about how much his words had hurt his beloved daughter, to whom he himself had actually sought to give the best, not for her happiness, but for a profitable future. He just grabbed his head as if it was hurting him badly after what had happened, realizing that with the pursuit of pleasing everyone around him as much as possible, including Lord Hare, he did not notice that he had ruined his relationship with the closest person in his life. And while Verdiuk realized that for the sake of his own business, he would have to improve his relationship with his own daughter, Isila herself was already in the gray and gloomy corridor, thinking that this estate was cursed and gloomy not only because of its appearance, but because of the terrible events that were happening in it and from which she could not escape. The girl touched the gray wall and spoke angrily to herself, saying that even the doors and windows and interiors were the same, which made her incredibly angry and made her always nervous, like she was in some hospital with scary corridors. And she entered her room with blue sofas, white walls, and a miniature wardrobe near one of them, telling herself that she herself did not care about this house or its inhabitants. And she gradually walked deeper into the room. The girl touched her white dress, which looked more like a nightgown, with her thin hands and told herself that she only needed Raymond and that she should focus on him, even though she was afraid of everything she saw in this mansion. However, as soon as she even looked at herself in the mirror, she saw her tired gaze, her stress-weary face, and her sad expression, telling herself that it was all unbearable. Also because she remembered her father's words very well. In her head, she clearly recalled the most beautiful features of Karen's appearance: her smile, gorgeous hair, and eyes with lush eyelashes, realizing that she could not compare with her in beauty, because she was literally better than her in everything, and this made Isila very depressed. And this made the girl burst into tears in front of the mirror for the umpteenth time that day, feeling powerless in front of everything and convincing herself that she was of no value to anyone in this place. And all her dreams of true love would not come true, because there were those who were better than her not only in appearance. The only thought that calmed her down was that Raymond would marry her anyway, and to some extent she was happy at least that she would achieve her dream. And with such thoughts, she decided to open the closet where she had prepared a variety of chic dresses for different occasions.